Chapter 588, Jonrad's Story 9. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr e/Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter. 592. Glymet whipped the blood off his blade, looking at the cave, which was now flowing with blood. Call this a massacre, because that's exactly what it was. One wolf cutting and slicing through a herd of sheep, yet in this case the wolf was more righteous than them sheep, or may equally as bad. Wolves don't care for such values either way. Still, with the carved head of Rathir decorating the table in front of him, Glymet sighed in weariness as his bad habit made things hard for him again. Once he sees blood, he never stops until nothing is moving. Most people would cease their attacks when someone screams mercy. I submit. But not Glymet, for he was stabbed in the back more than he could ever remember by those he has shown mercy towards. If he was just willing to listen, or at least went easy, he would have known who warned Rathir. Sadly, he initiated Plan B and murdered all in his way with the poison bombs he took from Zarya, then proceeded to behead Rathir before he would summon some annoying undead. With that, he burned everything to ash and left the cave to report back to Astrid, of course, without forgetting to mention the fact that he was betrayed by someone inside the Brotherhood. The necromancer's words unnerved many in the sanctuary. Who had warned him? It is a known fact that harming another brother in Sothis is one of the grave sins an assassin would do, and it is part of the 5 tenets to bring no harm to a fellow assassin. For this betrayal, some heads will surely roll, and Astrid was concerned for her family of assassins. She tried to convince Glymet that it can't be the case, and maybe an outsider found out about the contractor's intent of killing Rathir and warned him beforehand. Still, that surely was not a coincidence, and not long after the incident, the listener herself chose to visit Falkreath. This was Glymet's chance to gain her trust and learn where she and the Night Mother dwelt. While the word has arrived that the listener is on her way, the sanctuary of Falkreath remained on high alert even against each other, a scenario that Astrid wanted to avoid at all costs. On that day when fate was twisting its knots and scheming its plots, the listener set foot in the sanctuary of Falkreath with all the assassins lining up to meet her. "Hail, Cities!" She spoke, and the assassins bowed, including Glymet, who saw a pair of feet standing in front of him and a shadow cast in his direction. With a hand signal, the listener signaled Glymet to rise up and follow her as 2 members of the Black Hand remained in the sanctuary to keep an eye on the rest of the assassins. The listener, while small in stature, felt deep in her aura. She walked outside the sanctuary, and the snow covered the wood of Falkreath, as it was already the beginning of winter, and she shrugged off the cold weather as if she was familiar with it, yet on her masked face that only revealed her eyes, she had that look of wonder as she took some time to gaze at the snow. Glymet noticed that curious attitude of hers as she kept staring at the snow and looked at her hazel eyes, trying to figure out that strange woman. After all, she is his target to kill. The target Euthenir assigned him to kill. However, she noticed Glymet looked at her, and if looks could kill, her glare at him built an impenetrable wall between the two of them, and all the personality she let off just now was all shrouded behind the cold attitude of an assassin. "Brother Glymet," she called him. "Yes, listener." Glymet bowed and decided to wait on the kill. After all, the other target he had to eliminate wasn't here. She put her index on her face cover and removed it down, revealing her face and parts of her head. If you leave a comment/review/vote/rate, you will help motivating the author and promote the novel. Ginger brownish hair that can only be seen in the summer tundras, and curved eyes with pupils were hazel and arched brows. Her lips were full and rosy, and her face was fair while yet spotted with freckles. In every way, she was a young woman. A beautiful young woman. But more importantly, the way she moved, the way she spoke, the way she looked and looked at others, she was... Glymet couldn't find what word to use. Fearless as she strikes fear. Dauntless as she daunts the unworthy. Brave as she moves the heart of men. All those words described her, But there was more, since Glymet was searching for a thing he still can't find, and here it was plain and clear in that woman. What was it? Why is she special? My name is Alazan Dupre, and I am the leader of the Black Hand and the Dark Brotherhood. May the unholy matron embrace you. Name's Glymet, he replied. Ever since he joined, he used no nicknames or aliases, but just remained like that. A man with a forgettable face and a forgettable name. And how did you join the Brotherhood? She asked. My invitation happened in Warest less than a year ago, but I never failed a mission, and here I am, the last member of Warest Sanctuary. He replied. Interesting, she smiled. I heard of what has befallen our brothers and sister in Warest. A regrettable event. What was your last job in Warest? She asked. The assassination of King Jelric Berinia. My. Alazan widened her eyes. Killing a king. Now that's not something we do every day. When I handed out that mission, I was dying to complete it myself. Job well done, brother. Thank you. Seeing how delighted she was after hearing the hit was his, Glymet had that feeling once again as he watched Alazan closely. She felt his curious gaze and returned it with a stronger one, making him back down. Either way, I have come to give you an unpleasant task. We believe there is a traitor in our midst, and as the one who killed Rathir, only you are above suspicion. She said. How exactly did you guys from Bravel find out? Glymet asked. The night Mother spoke to me, of course, Alazan replied. And the unholy matron didn't reveal the traitor to you? Glymet asked. What the Mother reveals is her business. My job is to listen and not to speak. If she doesn't reveal something, who am I to question her? I understand. Glymet stopped arguing. If the Night Mother can see through every sanctuary and has some sort of omnipresence ability in the Dark Brotherhood, she should have some idea of his true intentions, yet so far, the listener seems unaware that Glymet is the ultimate traitor. But that didn't deter him. He was committed to ending the plague of the Dark Brotherhood, no matter his personal feelings. But, no, he can't think that way. Alazan gazed upon the assassin, and so the conflict was clear in his aura, but she had no idea of what sort of dangerous intentions he was brewing at that time. She just proceeded to the body of the matter directly. In better days, we would have purged this entire sanctuary, but after the destruction of Warest, our numbers are too few for that. I've told the others you'll be helping them with their contracts. Discover who the traitor is, and silence them, permanently. Alazan finally gave her order. This was a direct order from the acting head of the organization, and a step to further gain her trust and continue with his long mission. All he needs to do now is to follow each assassin in their missions and observe them. Of course, it wouldn't be this simple. If you leave a comment/review/vote/rate, you will help motivating the author and promote the novel. This is not only about observing, but also putting pressure on them. Glymet was betrayed and would cause the traitor to act stupidly, especially when they try to shift the blame off themselves at somebody else. It is then when Alazan Dupre will strike herself. And so it began. A series of interrogations and surveillance was administered to all Dark Brotherhood personnel. It was all within the 5 tenets, but still upset some of them to cause enough stress for the traitor. From that point, Glymet started to go on quests with the other members. At first, it was Astrid who cooperated the first, and she never spared Glymet of her deathly glares. What she hinted out was something along the lines of, I don't know traitors amongst my family. After Astrid came every assassin. Nazir, Arnjorn, Festus Krex, Gabriella, and Viezra. Still, all of them kept their oath of silence. The ones that spike her, however, were Babette, Aliras, and Varlin. Babette is a young girl, too young to be an assassin, or that's what people might think from the look she gives. She's at least 300 years of age, since she is but a little girl who was turned into a vampire. Gruesome? Not at all. This hag trapped into the body of a child enjoys every moment of the hunt, and is a crazed blood maniac of her own caliber. While the other two left less impression than Babette, Varlin is a dark elf who has been with the Brotherhood for some time now, while Elirath was a wood elf and seemed less friendly than the others. Those particular 3 showed a different attitude on their jobs, however, and Glymet managed to take their statements and find out some information from them. Elirath, the wood elf, hinted that the people of the Dark Brotherhood can't all be trusted, and he witnessed one of them sneaking in the dark the other day. The only feature he managed to notice is the red eyes of that individual. While Babette seemed most cooperative, the oldest member in the Brotherhood was but a cold-hearted, cruel killer that murdered villagers and people in a show of horror, before she casually tells Glymet that she noticed a hooded figure roaming outside the sanctuary a few nights ago. Varlin was the last to be assisted by Glymet, and all he said that found a mysterious note in a dead drop. From the delicate script, he believes the traitor is a woman. The only lead Glymet has now is a red-eyed hooded woman, which describes only a single member in the entire Brotherhood, Gabriella. The only problem is that Gabriella never left the sanctuary for the past month, eliminating her entirely as a suspect. With these leads narrowed down, one of the three who gave the lead should be lying. If it was Babette, then she is neither red-eyed nor someone who wears hoods. If it was Elirath, then he is neither red-eyed nor a woman. But if it was Varlin, he has red eyes and is usually hooded. Also, the lead about the traitor being a woman is his, which means he is lying. That night, Glymet met with Alazan under the moonlight outside the sanctuary to discuss the matter and how to end it. To make things better for him, it seemed that Alazan was also investigating on her part and had some results. I've learned something about our traitor. Apparently, Rather was spotted meeting someone with pointed ears near the sanctuary. She said, "So we're talking about an elf. Any ideas which one of our favorite elves can be the traitor?" She asked. "It is," Glymet was about to reply, but she raised her hand. "Don't tell," she said and handed him a dagger. "The traitor will be on the lookout, so approach them before they can feel anything and pass the judgment of the Black Hand silently. Deliver them to Sidis." The words were clear. Glymet obeyed with a smile. The dagger he received was not just any blade, but something that gave a lot of power. He felt rather powerful when he wielded it, and when he moved, he felt light and as if he was unseen. With a target on his mind, Glymet took the actual first step of being a genuine Dark Brotherhood assassin. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr. E/Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter 592. Chapter 589. Jonrad Story 10. The Fall of the Dark Brotherhood. Eid Mubarak, everybody. I guess I haven't revealed the news here yet on Dragonborn Saga, but I got engaged a while ago, and it is a thrill to tell you guys about it since most of my readers and my supporters are here. Also, I know I promised some that Jonrad Story 10 will be the last part of the filler arc, but now it got stretched to 11 sadly. Either way, I am pulling off more extra chapters on Patter 0N lately, and it is a blast what John is going, so consider coming over to read the premium stuff. Link here. https://linktr. E/Donovel. So, Glymet found the traitor out and clipped him? John, I hope I can say it was that simple. But it wasn't. You see, Glymet had that thing he was always running from, and it practically tormented him day and night. Jonrad, and that is Alina. Just like how Hilda and I received the so-called prophecy of our child's birth. He had something similar happening to him. Jonrad, goodness, people should really stop believing foretellers. John, what was he foretold anyway? Isha, one time in the past after the Great War, a priestess told Glymet that he will have a fate worse than death, that he will wish to find peace, but he won't find where his end will take him. Jonrad, and how is that connected to the dark? Wait, John made a grim face. But it shouldn't, should it? It seems you got the point. Jonrad, what are you two talking about? Jelinar, when Glymet received that blade from the listener willingly, he had officially damned his fate by his own hands. A fate worse than death. Jonrad, the very thing he spent his entire life running from? Alina, he became sworn to Sidis. John, that's it. Jonrad nodded, but that's a totally different detail, which he will discover later on. Right now, the blade and the task he was given took priority. But even if he acquired a blade of woe, he wasn't actually sworn to Sidis. He didn't believe in the creed of the Dark Brotherhood. John still insisted. Well, He had a stronger emotion enough to damn him the same fate. Jonrad said, and with a regretful face, Glymet fell in love. Blood, blood everywhere. There was no need to imagine what happened. Glymet came in, kept a certain member of the Brotherhood in his aim, and in the right moment, he attacked, leaving no chance of retaliation. While the traitor, Varlin the Dark Elf, had an opening and almost attempted to shoot a few arrows at Glymet, the latter was profoundly efficient in his job, using all the tricks in the book to close in on Varlin and strike the blade deep into his chest. Just like that, the traitor was dead on the ground. After the commotion caused by the fight, all the assassins gathered with a particularly angry look on Astrid's face, who looked at Glymet as if she wanted to rip him apart. Nothing good will come out of staying silent. Glymet immediately offered Varlin's blood to listener Alizan. She took some of the blood off the blade by the tip of her finger, raised it up to her eye level, then, without hesitation, put the finger in her mouth to taste the blood. The solid expressions which Alizan always carried around finally broke into a smile. Not a gentle, loving smile, but more of a vicious grin. "Hail, Cities," she spoke in joy. "Excellent work. The traitor is dead, and our sanctuary remains strong." As if a big rock was removed off their chests, the assassins finally managed to breathe once again. Their traitor is dead. They can now enjoy a little bit of peace before the usual drama stirs itself up again. Everyone here knew how the Brotherhood does business, and if the traitor has proved elusive, the lister has no qualms to liquidate the entire Falkreath sanctuary. Just one angry swoop of murders to kill the traitor, whoever they might be. In a way, Glymet saved them. After a short while, Alizan approached Glymet when he was distancing himself off the group and spoke to him. The kill was efficient and clean. "What's your background, assassin, if you don't mind me asking?" Glymet was the mercenary hired by Uthernir to murder her. That's his background. But he still can't kill her now. He must kill her along with the Night Mother. "I used to serve Titus Mead too during the Great War, before I start moving around as a mercenary," he said. "Former servant of the Emperor?" Alizan was taken aback by the answer, which filled her with wonder, and a smile formed on her face. Unlike that vicious grin, this smile was just thin and a bit corrupted, yet still conveyed how pleased she felt. "Will the former servant of the Emperor keep serving me a little bit more?" she asked. "Of course, listener." Glymet stood off the chair he was sitting on and displayed respect. Against him, Alizan stood up as well. "I could use an assassin like you by my side. Come, join me in Bravel." So, in every way, he looks as if he is succeeding his mission. John. Indeed. Jonrad. Where were you by the time he moved down to Bravel? John. Right at their tail, with the tip of my arrow aimed at the girl's heart. Jonrad replied in regret. "And you didn't take the shot?" John. "No. It was risky. I felt like my friend changed a little, and I was going to save him if something was wrong, but this would ruin the mission we have been working on for more than a year. It would anger him if I deliberately sabotaged the mission. All I needed, or thought I would need, was just 10 minutes with him alone. We just had to discuss things together, but he was looking at that listener girl like he never looked at anyone before." Jonrad. After the arrival to Bravel, the notorious crime city proved itself to Glymet as a den of anarchy and chaos from day one. However, under Alizan's guidance, the city was as hospitable to assassins as it was to all sorts of the scum of the world. However, turmoil started soon after. The city was plunged in blood as soon as the two largest skooma gangs in the city started their own war. Due to the intense fighting, the statue of the lucky old lady was destroyed. This was a critical piece of news to the Dark Brotherhood, since beneath the very same statue lies the crypt of the Night Mother, where one of the deities of the cult of assassins rests. This required the listener to take the necessary action of relocating the Night Mother to the Bravel Sanctuary. Still, Alizan felt disturbed that Bravel no longer became a safe place for the assassins. At that time, Alizan requested help from the other standing Brotherhood sanctuaries, and the closest to Bravel was the one in Cheydinhal. Those who came as reinforcement were two assassins known as Garnag and Andronica. Still, even after the trouble kept erupting, one day, Glymet was summoned by Alizan for an urgent problem. As he arrived, she informed him that Garnag and Andronica have gone missing. Previously, she sent Andronica to assassinate the heads of the two warring gangs in order to stop the mayhem around the sanctuary while Garnag was sent on, and neither of them returned thus. He is now tasked with investigating and rescuing the assassins. But that was not the end of it. As Glymet returned to his residence in the city to prepare for the mission, a message was found on his table directly under an open window. It was a dangerous thing to see his residence broken into, especially in these times, but the content of the message served as a reality check for Glymet. It was a message from the man who hired him to destroy the Dark Brotherhood, Euthernir. It read, "Agent, your last message was unclear. Why are you in Bravel? Have you found the listener? I have a business manager in town. Meet him at the Silverhome Inn." The listener and the Night Mother, both are the targets of Glymet since the start of this job. Both are present on an arm's reach from him. He could just go back in, and the fire ate the message. Glymet walked out of his residence as he collected his gear and got ready to see things through. There's still time. Once he stepped out, he was already heading towards where Andronica should be. The Skooma Den of Bravel. The Claws gang was a gang with a powerful Khajiit presence, since the borders with Elsewhere are not too far south. That gang controls a big chunk of the city, and since the moment Glymet walked into their streets, many pairs of eyes kept following him around every corner. There was no sneaking around on this job. If he acts suspiciously, he will get chased out by a horde of bloodthirsty catfolk. Well, at least that would be the case if he acted up too early. He just needs to take the usual route all the way to the place where normal people are allowed to buy skooma from the Claws. In other words, the local distribution center. Of course, once he arrived, he circled the place and headed towards the building where the Claws were holed up. Naturally, a Khajiit henchman stopped him on the way in, putting its hand against Glymet. "This den is Claws territory. Get lost," the Claws henchman said. "Oh yeah?" Glymet looked at him and with an annoyed face before holding the Khajiit's hand, twisting it, and kicking him in. "Tell your boss to prepare his neck." And he took his blades out as he walked into the building. Tens of Khajiits and their customers were coming, going, and sitting in the place which looked like a pub for skooma. They all noticed the Khajiit that fell in, and all looked at the man who did that. "Let's get this over with." He said. An awful aura came off him, filling the place with something akin to poison. The intoxicated customers started to sweat from panic, and those with weak constitutions were on the ground puking their guts out. The Claws gangsters saw that and realized that a predator had infiltrated their Denver. At least they're on their ground. The Claws were a fearless gang with years upon years of reputation and strong ties to the big moonsugar brewers in Elsewhere. They feared neither the Count of Bravel nor the Emperor. If someone is in their den, their claws shall get to him. And a flurry of razor-sharp attacks flew towards Glymet. Where he was standing turned to rubble as he jumped across the place, reaching the other walk, before reversing his momentum to jump to the upper flower, waving his swords at anything that comes near him. Many spellcasters existed among the Claws, and some of them were already targeting him with simple spells, but he reached the upper ground and started kicking everyone on his way down, making piles and piles of bodies as the fight raged on. There was no one to match his skills, a skill even the Dark Brotherhood wasn't aware of, and he kept cutting down all the enemies and looking through each room with no trace of Andronica. Enough! That was until some dangerous-looking Khajiit walked into the building and shouted as loud as he could. "Let us parley, assassin," the Khajiit said. Glymet surely stopped his rampage and looked down at the Khajiit, recognizing him. "You're the Kingpin?" he asked. "Yes, this one is the Kingpin." The Claws Kingpin replied, indicating that he was the leader of the infamous gang. Most Khajiit look like cats and tigers, but this particular guy looked like a leopard. He was a gigantic Cathay-Rot and had a vicious face. "You seek the assassin woman? She tried to kill this one." The Kingpin approached as he looked up. "I assume you came all this way to get her." Glymet found it annoying and stayed in his place, replying only with a nod. "Perfect. If you want her back, you must do something for the Claws," the Kingpin said with a grin. Glymet didn't reply, but waited for the Kingpin to keep going, making the latter feel awkward. I want you to assassinate the head of our rivals, the Eclipse. When it is done, meet me at the bridge south of town." The Kingpin said. There was not much Glymet could do, but he nodded and simply went into one of the rooms to escape through the window. This was bad. Glymet felt more depressed on this bad day. An assassin is taken hostage and the city is in chaos. But there was good news amidst the confusion. Once Glymet reached the treasury where the other assassin, Garnag, had gone, he received the news that an assassin had murdered the head of the treasury. So where did he go afterwards? This was in itself good and bad. Somehow, even Glymet became lost in confusion, but there was one chance. If all the odds are against you, it means one must reshuffle the cards and play on new odds. It was time to make a deal. There were two ways Glymet would be able to do this, but looking at the sky, the night was still young, and he needed more time for a better opportunity. Before going for the deal, he stopped by the Silverhome Inn and went ahead to meet the messenger of Uthernir. "Have you found the listener?" The man in a neat merchant dress asked. "What I know is that there is a sanctuary here in Cyrodiil, and people who can get in touch with the listener. As for the real thing, I think she hides her identity very well. However, I am close." In a way, Glymet didn't reveal Alazan's identity just yet and went around the question of a lie that can't really be called a lie. "Very well. Just so you know, Master Uther will arrive in Bravel shortly," the messenger said before exiting the room and the inn entirely. This was another piece of depressing news. Uthernir is even more persistent now. This can't be good. Glymet thought for a while, as he can no longer hide it anymore. His feelings towards Alazan, this strange energy pulling him towards her, the feeling that he can just forget his burdens around her, even though she is the villainest of villains. His nightmares even stop haunting him around her. It is a sickness he had since the day he was trapped in that cage with Tyr 10 years ago. The fate which will be his downfall. Alazan once said that life is only worth living once, and that death is not a problem. She said that she welcomes death every night and day. She said that not fearing death is the only way to liberate oneself from agony. But Glymet still fears fate, and he loves Alazan because he sees her freedom and longs for something similar. He had his own suffering and was time to pursue it. Where next? Now that Glymet knew that Uthernir shall arrive, he needed to act hastily and reach the other Scumagang, but as he walked out of the inn's room, he heard some noises coming from a nearby door with a hint of familiarity. Just as he approached, he gazed through the keyhole, and what he saw made him feel like in a crisis right away. Immediately, he kicked the door and walked in sword in hand and mask on face. Inside the room were three individuals. The first was Uther's messenger from a while ago, the second was a mean-looking ugly guy with a bloodied knife, and the third was an orc tied to a chair and suffering intense wounds. That orc was Garnag, the missing assassin. It went without saying that Glymet beheaded the messenger with one sword strike and attacked the torturer right away in fast-paced combat, which Glymet easily won, beheading the other man as well. Once that was that, he immediately freed Garnag and escorted him outside the empty inn. "It is nice to see you, brother," Garnag said with a tired smile as he leaned against an alley wall. "You too. You can walk?" Glymet asked. "I can. By Cities, this was intense." "What happened to you?" Glymet asked. "They kept asking about the listener." "Cities, forgive me. I told them she was here in Bravel. They didn't tell me who they were, but I heard them mention a name. Uther." The orc replied. Glymet's face darkened. There will be no hiding this from the Brotherhood anymore. This was a close call. The messenger knew he was lying, and thankfully he killed him before Uther could be alerted to his betrayal. "You get back to the sanctuary. I will go on and try to get to Andronica," Glymet said, but he turned to Garnag. "I know you are a strong fighter, but who could have bested you this badly?" "I don't know." Garnag seemed depressed about the matter. A Nord, very large, red hair, shoots fire from his hand and wields the sword like a serpent demon. One name had those qualities gathered. The one Glymet feared more than even Uthernir, the other mercenary, who is also after the bounty on Alazan and the Night Mother. It is Jonrad Firemane. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr/e/Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter 593. Chapter 590, Jonrad's Story, 11 Fall of the Dark Brotherhood. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr/e/Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter 594. His problems had no end, and in doing so, Glymet had the weird illusion that the difficulties he is up against are all set up. The prophecy keeps coming to his head time and time again. His fate shall be worse than death. This happened a long time ago. Maybe around that time, Jonrad got a grim prophecy about his son as well. He was in Morrowind when it happened. He was still in his short-lived relationship with Loneth as he accompanied her for a couple of journeys, and during one of them, he was really drunk that night, as if he lost his head due to some stress he was having. On his way to the residence he was staying in, he bumped into an aged woman whose back hunched and gray, dun-mare skin lost its luster. He recognized the pattern of her tattoos to be Ashlandic. Once she looked into his eyes, she said that she saw a touch of fate and laughed at the drunkard who hit her, asking him not to help her up. She said something about the fate of the forgotten fool who saved an empire from one fate to a worse one. With his tendency to disbelieve, he cursed at her with an indecent word which made her grin even wider, saying that if she was to live to see it, his demise is a fate worse than 1,000 deaths. The words disturbed him, but when he met Loneth once again, she spoke of that foreteller woman from the Ashland who has told many accurate prophecies and is considered some sort of a prophetess in these parts, making even the great houses seek her words of wisdom. Glymet remained dismissive of it still, and never believed the words of a madwoman, as he thought. But day by day, month by month, crisis by crisis, it grew on him. Like an itch he can't scratch, he rushed back to Morrowind one day to face the prophetess one last time to drive this madness off his mind. He must make sure that the woman tells him things clearer this time around. A fate worse than death. Who would want any of that? Alas, once he arrived at Morrowind and ventured into the Ashland, he was told that she took her own life not long ago. He was told that before she died, she was muttering that she would never get in the way of fate or help anyone in that fool's errand. Glymet, who was once thinking of settling in somewhere quiet, got his life flipped upside down. He learned that the woman was a priestess of Bothia, a Daedra that he offended during the Great War by killing her agent. Now he is surely cursed. He then headed out to the nearest shrine and asked to commune with the Daedra, but he was welcomed and got chased away. He visited every shrine in the north of Tamriel, going through Morrowind and Skyrim all the way to High Rock until he finally settled there after running into his old friend Jonrad. In a way, Glymet was never free from the words that haunted him. He feared that fate and thought it would be the end with him damned somewhere far in the bowls of oblivion, but after years of searching, he gave up to exhaustion. That was until he met Alizan and felt what he felt back then. As a member of the Dark Brotherhood, she knew too damn well that her fate is worse than death. Those who get swallowed by the void of cities after their death are nothing but doomed, yet even with that, she still smiled when she saw the snow in Skyrim. She appreciated the beauty around her and didn't run around like a headless bug trying to find its salvation. Why worry about fate? She said. Glymet asked her if she is ever worried about what will happen. She said something very unlike her. She said that the future is the illusion of the weak, the shackles that are meant to make them even weaker. The past is what was once a present, and the present we live in is the most definite reality, which we are in control of. As for the future, it is something we never witness because we do not live in it. It is something that shall never exist because it is always a future, and thus it is never going to happen. By subtracting what is real of the past and the present, only the future remains, and it is unreal. So why the worry? The future always holds unpredictability, and those who follow the myriad ways of cities submit themselves to the unpredictability. Those words would always bring Glymet peace of mind. He took in a deep breath, then walked ahead to where he was supposed to be, the Eclipse Gang hideout, the rivals of the Claws who hold Andronica as captive and the other assassination targets. Just like how he did with the Claws, he did here with the Eclipse, and swarms of dark elves jumped at him, but he overwhelmed them with his mere existence, and so he drew out the leader of the gang, the one known as the Baroness. Seeing her men lying around and cornered by one man, she faced Glymet with her bodyguards attempting to solve the problem. "What is going on out here? Let us talk like civilized people." She spoke to Glymet. "Your people lack civility, even though I told them I want to meet you." He replied, "Meet me? Well, we are meeting, but this is not the right way or the right time to arrange a meeting, stranger. Speak your business." She said, "A compatriot of mine was hired the other day for a hit against the Claws kingpin. She was caught, and when I negotiated her release, you can imagine what the Claws wanted in return." He said. Saying so, the Eclipse Baroness realized that she may be in grave danger, since it is her head, is what the Claws obviously want, but Glymet continued. "I know my compatriot is probably dead, and the Claws will turn against me once I deliver your head, so this situation calls for cooperation." And with the way he put it, Glymet added a few things about the Claws being ready for a full-scale assault tonight. "I see," she said with both fear and respect to Glymet's ability. "If that is really the case, then we have a common enemy. I will send some of my men to help you assassinate the rogue." Deal. There was no trusting the Claws, there was no trusting the Eclipse either. With this deal, Glymet can now double-cross the Claws before they double-cross him. That night at the South Bridge of Bravel, the Kingpin and some of his men waited for Glymet, who was supposedly coming towards them with the head of the Eclipse Baroness. He was indeed carrying a head that belonged to a female dark elf, but this was a traitor that the Eclipse Baroness executed the other day. Glymet stood away from the bridge and spoke loudly. "I don't see my compatriot," he shouted. The Kingpin smirked and nodded. "Bring the assassin," he said. The Claws seemed to be upholding their word for the moment, as Glymet was still out of reach, but as soon as the beaten and tied-up Andronica was brought up, he started approaching. Once he saw Andronica, he nodded towards her. "You all right?" "I am sorry. I got sloppy. Let them get the drop on me. It won't happen again," she replied. "I know." He nodded and turned to the Kingpin, throwing the head on the ground. "Your kill." The features of the head were deformed thanks to what seemed to be an intense fight, so the Kingpin could only speculate. "At least you were useful," he said. "Still, one problem remains." Glymet and Andronica felt the bloody intent coming from the Kingpin. "The assassins tried to kill this one once. It does not pay to take risks, you understand?" The Kingpin smirked before giving the signal, "Kill them." Immediately, a series of shouts and screams could be heard atop the roofs nearby as all the Claws ambushers were being ambushed. Immediately, Glymet cast a lighting spell that pushed the Cagiate who was holding Andronica back into the river and rushed to save her. "It's the Eclipse. We have been betrayed," the Kingpin shouted. "You call this a betrayal?" Glymet was offended by the double standards of the Cagiate as he faced his sword in hand. In such a close distance, and with the hostage secured, the two assassins can finally run amok, causing havoc and killing the Kingpin. With one strong push, they overpowered the Kingpin and his guards, pushing one of them into the river and stabbing the other, before Glymet finally managed to run past the Cagiate and stab him to death, while Andronica beheaded him in vengeance for her capture. As the two assassins were finished with the Kingpin, they watched as the fight intensified even further, and the Claws were hell-bent on avenging their fallen leader, with the Eclipse gaining more ground. It was time to cause more chaos. "Many thanks," Andronica said to Glymet. "Now if you'll excuse me, I need to go finish off the Eclipse leader. The Night Mother commands it, after all. I'll cover for you." And with that, a bloody night of screams and horror fell over Bravel as a slaughter was happening in every street. During that night, both the Eclipse Baroness and the Claws Kingpin were confirmed dead when the Count's knights went down to clear the streets. Still, the gang war never calmed down, and in these times, the Dark Brotherhood and Alazan had to stay in their sanctuary and guard the Night Mother day and night. However, the news that Garnag delivered to her about the man named Uther, who was seeking the listener, upset her. She soon told Glymet why. "When I was a young woman, My father was an abusive, brutish man. His cruelty led to the murder of my mother. I ran for my life, and he chased me to no end until I joined the Brotherhood, swearing that someday I would use the assassin's arts to end him. His name is Uthernir, and now I know he's in Bravel. At long last, the Night Mother has given me permission to end his life. I need you to find him, but don't kill him. Just lure him to me. His life is mine. He can do that. This situation has turned into a matter where there is nothing but wrong. An abusive father, a killer daughter, a band of thieves, a group of assassins. Whichever side, it is damnation upon damnation, but little did Glymet care. His personal justice made him stand with Alazan against Uther, and thus he went to meet the old man. Uthernir was suspicious of Glymet at first, calling him wayward, but that was all put aside when Glymet revealed the location of the sanctuary to Uthernir. The man's eyes lit with killing intent and madness as he called upon his men. A lot of mercenaries were gathered when Uther ordered, and he immediately marched towards the Brotherhood sanctuary. On the other hand, Alazan was prepared, but the numbers were overwhelming. The assassins were good at doing their job, killing the attackers and defending the sanctuary. But the flood of bodies was endless. The main building was taken after a dozen assassins died. The tunnel underground was easy to defend, but a fire overwhelmed the defenders and the smoke started choking them. The sanctuary halls and rooms were raided, but they were not easy to defend. And finally, the inner crypt where Alazan waited. Many mercenaries and assassins stood against each other in the final stand as Alazan was sitting on a barrel, while holding two swords and waiting for a man to walk ahead. Uthernir stood between the mercenaries. At last, the Night Mother's crypt. Men, burn everything to the ground. And you, Glymet, kill the listener. Alazan, who was on the other side with what was left of the assassins, widened her eyes in shock. What? But I thought. You thought you had a loyal assassin, the most skilled you'd ever seen? No, my dear. Your trusted lieutenant has been my agent from the beginning. Now, my friend, fulfill your contract. Kill the listen. Just as those words came, Glymet's blade was swung diagonally towards Uther's neck, who was but an arm away from him, yet in a second, a magic sigil stopped the blade from claiming Uther's head. Glymet realized that Uther was taking caution against him, and thus he moved as fast as he could. Bang! All of a sudden, a smoke bomb exploded between the assassins and the mercenaries. No one knows who threw it, but its appearance marked the beginning of a mad battle. Tides upon tides of mercenaries and assassins rushed in the room and mercilessly killed each other, forcing Glymet to retreat against a wall, but as soon as he saw an opening, he rushed towards Alazan. "You all right?" he asked while she held her injured shoulder. "I am." "Where's Garnag?" she asked. "There." Garnag the orc was wounded and probably lost his right eye, but he was kneeling down trying to protect someone with his own body. Glymet and Alazan got to him only to find him mumbling words of insanity over the shredded corpse of Andronica. "Snap out of it, Garnag," Glymet shouted as he dragged the orc away. "No, Andronica, I shall accompany her to Sidis. She won't die alone." Garnag shouted over the death of his lover. "Garnag, listen to me. You're hurt. Get the Night Mother to the safety of Cheydinhal. We will hold these mercenaries off." Alazan spoke. "This is your final order. Tell them to find a new listener. Then you can join Andronica and the rest of us." Garnag looked at Alazan with broken spirit, but in a last act of defiance, he nodded and rushed through the secret corridor. "Alazan, you go too." Glymet tried to push her away. "No." Alazan laughed, and with a bloody face, she smiled at Glymet and held his face before getting a little close. "Mother told me tonight I see Sidis. Tonight I am greeted in the void by eternal silence. Tonight I die and take him with me." Madly, she rushed towards Uthernir and started cutting his mercenaries left and right. Glymet couldn't let go and charged with her, not sure what he was fighting for at this moment. He saw light where she saw darkness, and in that light guided him, that direction. Thus whoever stood in his way was to be cut down. Each time he gets closer, someone tries to block the light off him, but he would just cut right through. The two of them finally got to Uther. Father, for long, long years, I have awaited this. Alazan shouted in pure madness. As have I. I knew while you lived, I would never be safe. Come, let us end this once and for all. Uther took his staff and his sword and rallied his mercenaries against the last two remaining assassins. Glymet felt the light of Alazan brighten even further, and she was as if winged with brightness. The wings brightened further, and in a moment, the two looked at each other knowing what was happening. Fire, like a wave, like a burst, like a dragon breath. It burned everything. It burned the mercenaries. It burned Uther. It burned Alazan. And they all answered to the flame. Glymet stood in a daze as the fire burned brightly, and without any hint of will, he dropped to his knees. He only needed to raise his gaze to see who was there. Jonrad. Jonrad Firemane was standing on the opposite side of the burning corpses, retreating his blade and returning it to its sheath. Glymet was like someone who woke up from a nightmare to a worse one. He would have walked into the fire, but Jonrad rushed and stopped him. Even for those who wandered deep into the darkness, light was something they would seek all the time. But some would mistake illusions to be the light and blind themselves to deeper darkness. And so, the Dark Brotherhood falls, Jon said, looking at his father, whose face was lit by the golden dancing fires. Jonrad nodded. As I said, Uther wanted to kill his daughter, but sure as hell they went to cities together. Still, the Brotherhood lives on. Jon added. It would take more than just fate to get us rid of the Brotherhood. Jonrad replied in agreement. Not sure if this is a tale of victory or defeat. Wolfer added. As I said, boy, some tales have no heroes. Only people in the darkness searching for a glimmer of light. Jonrad added, by killing the listener, I have fulfilled my 7th labor, but it would take 8 years for Glymet to forgive me. 8 years? Jon asked, was it that year when we first met in Dawnstar? Yes, that very day. Jonrad nodded. Everyone went silent as they all understood that this story was meant for Jon. Right now, he is the one operating against the Dark Brotherhood, and he has many plans for them. What Jonrad wanted to say was that down that path, there will be no light. It took 10 minutes for those who were gathered around to start standing up and going down the tower or returning to their rooms around. Those who remained behind were only Jon and Jonrad. You know, Leon spoke, your labors were a piece of cake compared to what I have been through. Now you're complaining? Jonrad laughed. I just feel it is not fair. Jon protested. We'll take that up with Azra. Jonrad pointed towards the large shrine overlooking the mountain range south to New Sarthal. Nah, I'll pass. Pussy. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr. /Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter. 594. Chapter 591. Domain complete. 1. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr. /Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter. 595. So, you have been listening to one of your father's stories, and you're finally getting motivated for some work? Nurina asked. Well, considering some things that I understood last night, I need to push some of my dormant plans ahead. Jon replied. He was levitating in the sky, overlooking a piece of land surrounded by water from every corner. Obviously an island. The shores of that island were frozen from the breeze of the Arctic sea surrounding it. It was layered with a shield of thick trees that blocked the cold with many magical runes embedded on them. The trees would change as one head to the inside of the island gradually, as if all the 4 seasons of the year were overlapping. Outside was the winter, surrounding the autumn, which by its part surrounded the summer down to the center of the island, where the air was fair like spring. This was the weather forecast in Jon's magic domain, the island in the Sea of Ghosts which he uses as a base for his magic experiments. A mage's domain is a piece of space which the mage uses to contain their magical essence. Usually can only be utilized by archwizards. Jon had his domain constructed prematurely because he always had an excess amount of magicka within his soul. But today is a different story altogether. John is now perfecting the domain and completing all the finishing touches in one go while Nerina was watching. "Remarkable," she exclaimed in wonder. At this point, she finally looked at John, knowing that he had finally stepped into that realm, beyond his master. In terms of knowledge and experience, Nerina is surely the winner, but magic didn't rely just on knowledge and experience, else the nerdiest would have been the most powerful. There's an element to magic that no one is even able to fathom, and that called by some as capacity. Not to be confused with magica capacity. The magic capacity is the extent of how far one's potential can take him. This also shouldn't be confused with talent. In a way, it is all about skill, talent, imagination, and will all together. In those terms combined, John was second to none, and the domain he is forging was an enigma to the beholder. In the simplest of meaning, a domain is a subspace. The world of Mundus in its entirety is a gigantic cell. Oblivion and Aetherius, while worlds of their own, are spaces that are attached to Mundus, thus subspaces to it. Both Aetherius and Oblivion may have predated Mundus, but with its existence, they came into balance and became one entire stable universe known as the Orbis. But that was not the end of the creation story. Many worlds can be created as subdimensions and subspaces all the time. A mage's domain is such an existence, separate world, a private pocket of reality where its owner can become as powerful as a Daedric prince in their realm. That's how ridiculous a domain is. Strong individuals who are pursuing immortality create such realms and link them to higher planes such as Oblivion and Aetherius to reside in them forever and keep their souls in a state of constant life. That's a shortcut to eternal life, but not quite an immorality. Either way, a domain requires an astronomical amount of magicka, and its failure is disastrous since the owner is not using up just their magicka, but also their capacity to contain magicka, in other words, parts of their soul. Let's say that Wizard A has 1,000 magicka points in his magicka pool. He then attempts to create a domain that requires him 900 magicka points. Wizard A will give up that amount of his pool's capacity, leaving him with only 100 magicka points in his pool as the upper limit to what he has. If the construction was a failure, the used-up pool capacity can't be retrieved. If it was a success, Wizard A will practically lose that portion either way, but his link to his domain will constantly provide him with that amount either way. To simplify it, it is as if you were storing your magicka pool in a safe place with the ability to withdraw from it at any time. But there is one condition. The domain must contain a method that holds its reality together and keep that magicka in constant circulation and preferably in constant growth. This enchantment, however, is not just complicated, but it is nigh impossible to pull out. But John already knew this method as he pulled it off multiple times in the past. The Deadly Sins Artifact series, John's soul artifacts that contain portions of his soul. Greed, wrath, pride, lust, and finally gluttony are the 5 sins John created with the same method he is finishing his domain, embedding his essence in. But this enchantment is by far his masterpiece. A ground spell, a layering set of spells, a central rune, dragon shouts, various artifacts, a magical intelligence, a multi-temporal interference. John took no chances at all with the creation of the enchantment. The actual heart of the domain is going to be a gigantic magicka reactor made of very rare materials that can process time and space to basic magicka partials if possible. With such brute force, John crafted a device as capable as the Staff of Magnus, only in theory and limited to inner domain usage. Once he buried the heart deep underground, he started to power it up and gradually started to the spatial laws of the world. "John, are you sure about this?" Nerina asked. "I thought you were excited." John smiled. "You're the one who tempted me," she said, walking closer to him. "You could have just used the normal method." Heh. John laughed and replied with a crazy smile, "No. The normal method, the crazy method. Those are the only 2 methods that one can use to construct a domain." Nerina, and almost 999,999% of the arch-wizards in history would use this method. They would find certain objects such as rings, staves, necklaces, and such to create a subspace within then cultivate it into a domain. Nerina's domain exists around her finger, and it functions just like the storage cube, which John uses. Actually, this storage cube was once a domain constructed by the young Sothasil when he first became an arch-wizard thousands of years ago, but he gave it up to his latter magnificent and most famous domain, Clockwork City. The crazy method to create a domain is to practically steal a part of Mundus, a land, an island, a mountain even. The massive difference of space between a small artifact domain and a gargantuan world domain is like night and day. There are a few domains known in this day and age. Castle Fokihar, a domain of an ancient vampire lord that can travel to oblivion. Clockwork City, the still functional domain of the dead god king Sothasil, which exists out of the world. And most notably the Isle of Artium, the teleporting island of the Sigic order that travels between Mundus and Aetherius. And now rises the Golden Dragon Isle, an island that floats in the sky. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr/e/Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter 595. Chapter 592, Domain Completed 2. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr/e/Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter 597. Creating a pocket dimension in a small object and expanding the law of space inside of it, then powering that space with an artificial magica animus connected to the soul of the caster, creates what is known as a mage domain. Applying the same method on a large chunk of space in the world creates a mage domain as well, but a lot more different in terms of power and functionality. In terms of power, a world domain is much more powerful. In terms of functionality, it requires more energy and can't be carried around everywhere. Well, unless it is a flying island. Not too shabby, right? John said, looking at the thing he made in utmost pride. Meanwhile, Nerina was struggling to find the right words. "You son of a bitch!" She uttered them without even thinking. What's in front of her was something that hasn't been seen since the time of Umbriel, the infernal city. This takes her back to a couple of hours ago, when John was finally done with preparations and started working on the real thing. Amidst the sea of mists and salt, an island shook far greater than an earthquake, and nothing of what inhabited it remained standing as the land reshaped itself around the central heart of the domain buried deep beneath the island. The land, which was subject to the constant spells which John used to cultivate this place with, became a very different land compared to the island it once was, and by the power of magica, it started to ascend. John held two staves, one of the highest quality and the other is obvious pride, as he recited all the vocal commands to conjure a ridiculous spell of levitation on the island. He spoke in ancient Nordic, ancient Elvish, Draconic, and even Daedric in order to lay out thousands upon thousands of magical runes from various shapes and origins. John was very determined for this to work, as instead of magically carving the runes with magica, he used his Thursday to carve these runes the same way the dragons and the ancient voice masters wrote their word wall. The wet earth, which rose from the sea, solidified itself into hard black rocks due to the transmutations John used on it. The island started to become much more stable, but to increase its magical efficiency, John opened up vines in its ground to guide the magica to the edges of the island. Those vines lit in the pure, ethereal blue color of magica. The amount of magica John poured into the domain was suffocating to normal people as magical anomalies were forming around him at an insane rate. Breaking the fabric of reality was very undesirable from the standpoint of the world, and thus it would start attacking whoever is interfering with that reality. Nerina took care of the anomalies, which looked like small wisps, and kept an eye on John as the enchantments on his robe were no longer keeping up with the insane output. The fabric of his robe started to snap from the places the enchantment was embedded, and in mere seconds, John's upper half was naked as his demonically Herculean body was exposed to the magica of the world. "John, use Azura's power," Nerina shouted. "No," he replied, gritting his teeth. This domain should only have my essence, and my essence alone. A power that isn't mine will ruin it. It has to be him and him alone. The magicka gushing from his skin, pores, and hair started to brighten up like the sun. His arcane tattoos, which would be usually filled with the chaos infection, had his magicka running throughout their draconic patterns, making John look like a celestial being. His red hair brightened like the flame, and finally, his blue eyes were emitting beams of arcane energy. In his state, John looked human no more. His shouts started to echo again, only this time much louder and much stronger. The world shook, and the storms brewing on top of the ocean turned into a hurricane. Seeing the world try to hinder him so badly, John stopped the staff from channeling magicka and charged it with a powerful lightning spell, which he then threw towards the hurricane like a spear before returning his free hand to Pride and fully focusing its power to channel magicka into the last phase. The personification of lust, Venus, the personification of wrath, Odokuro, as well as greed and gluttony flew from John's side towards the domain and started solidifying its foundation together as their master commanded to fully snatch this piece of earth from the world and thus ending the transformation of the Golden Dragon Isle into John's complete domain. The storm settled, the magical anomalies disappeared, and the island kept riding until it blocked the sun. While gargantuan in size, the base of the island grew thinner as one went down with a ginormous hollow spot in its middle. The hollow spot was filled with an orbit globe that had many disks and arcs revolving around it in all directions with a ton of protection arrays and runes lighting across its main body. Finally, it is over. John lost all his magicka for the first time in a very long time and couldn't even maintain his levitation spell, but thankfully, and before he fell down, he was holding up to Pride, which had a built-in levitation ability. "Nirina, some help here," he shouted, but the awestruck Nirina would need at least 5 minutes of dumbfoundedness to be receptive to the outside factors again. Either way, John as well couldn't set his eyes off his latest masterpiece as he watched the waterfalls flow down from the newly made island and relatively many changes happening in its properties. This overpowered magic domain was linked directly to his heart, and as it started pouring out magicka into the world, John was finally supplied with what he needed to move around the air. "Not too shabby, right?" he asked as he went up to stand on the staff, which was annoyed by this action. "You son of a bitch," she muttered. "Oh." John looked at her with narrowed eyes. It was that impactful. "You son of a bitch. All right. I know you're praising. You son of a bitch. Don't you slander my mother, Mom." John was baffled by his own logic, but he still delivered his point. Nirina levitated up as he sighed and followed suit before arriving at the edge of his domain. The forest, which was made of maple and birch trees, has completely vanished, or rather mutated. Right now, the island was crowned with a strange-looking forest that looked like nothing in this world. It was akin to towers of trees and gigantic plants that came from various regions in the world. Astonishingly, the former created a very thick barrier around the island and created a very complicated maze. "This is..." Nirina showed confusion looking at the strange plants. "Mundane life forms," John replied. "Well, as I separated the space, I kept the flow of time constant, but it wasn't easy to control. You can say that all the plant life on the island became subjects to growing up and recreation, which altered its nature due to the constant changes in the temporal flow. As I also altered the weather of the island to be warm rather than frigid cold, the mutation became more tropical." His explanation was spot on, but since he is the owner of the domain, this information was just being provided to his head by the domain itself. After all, it is part of him. With his thinking alone, the trees in front of him reformed themselves to resemble a gate made of wood, and vines the land started to shake and transmit into hard road tiles which flipped themselves into shape. The way was now open to a deeper part in the domain. John stood ahead and bowed to Nirina and gestured with his hand for her to go forward. She walked ahead, looking left and right at the well-established road, and the maze of trees becoming a straight road for her. John followed, and as he approached Nirina, he put his hand on her back, and with a cunning smile, he manipulated the space around them. Nerina was just walking normally and seeing no end to the road ahead, but suddenly, the space rushed her forward as it shrunk and then extended. When the space turned back to normal, she was leagues ahead of where she was just now. Holy shit! She freaked out. Well, walking at your pace would take us forever, John said. Motherfucker! She hit his hand. EW? Never gonna happen. He looked at her with disgust. But where they were standing almost took her breath away once she looked around. The jungle maze was no more, and instead of it was an enormous clearing with a dome of plants acting as a ceiling, only letting in the fragrant breeze and ticklish rays of sunlight. But this beauty was nothing compared to the garden. That garden was in the center of the Golden Dragon Isle in the past, with the pavilion, the creeks, and the area where John had his wedding. It was completely persevered and rather remade to be much wider with flowing rivers and green meadows. Still, it was all surrounded by a large circular rail from the platform John and Nerina were standing on. You persevered it, but you changed something, she said, right? John nodded. The area inside the rail was akin to a different reality. John raised his hand and gestured by bringing his index and thumb closer. The garden shrunk massively, and more space started to appear around it. Mountains, lakes, rivers, a complete island edged by a crystal-like sea. Nerina was shocked beyond her senses. A reality inside a reality? She looked around and felt the mana, a pocket dimension inside a pocket dimension. Well, theoretically everyone would think that way, but there is this thing about the laws of space that fascinated me. The more you make it shrink, the more it expands. John replied. So, Nerina struggled to catch up by just controlling the space, right? And her eyes lit up. Your domain has no limits on what you can expand and what you leave constant. In other words, it is like the abyss, it can be endless? Of course not. John laughed. All I did was to manipulate the space in some part by increasing the magicka and viola. I can fit an entire city in the center. An entire city? The outside of domain itself looks like an entire city, but that bastard can just add another layer in. Nerina had her ear ringing from all the cerebral processes that were lagging together in her head, but seeing him look at his creation with pride, she just had a sensation of fulfillment as she smiled and stood beside him. I wanted to ask a question. He spoke. What is it? Is it real? He asked. To be honest, is this part of my domain where I can fit a certain city inside even real? She thought but couldn't arrive at an answer. Why are you asking? Her question made him feel a little bit heavy, but he raised his staff and showed her why. Because I can do this. Instantly, the garden and the island which were in the center of his domain started to sink in that sea. Nerina watched as an entire island crumpled and completely disappeared underwater. She tilted her head and narrowed her eyes, then looked at John as she watched him reverse the process, returning the garden back into its previous shape. That's new, she said, not expecting this feature in particular. I know I can get into the garden, but will it be real, or is it just an illusion made by the domain? He asked. It is strange that it is your domain, and you are oblivious about it. She said, a Dater Prince can do that with their realms too. This is not a realm, he said. Yes, it is not. Nerina nodded with a smile. This is not a realm, she said, pointing at the whole domain, but then she pointed at the central area. That, however, is a realm. A realm? Inside a domain? He asked. I'm the one who's supposed to be asking how, but you made the most bizarre things ever. If you can do anything with your domain, you can do anything with that. Demi-realm. He started thinking before pointing his staff again. This time, rather than drowning in the sea, a cloud of mist surrounded the entire island, and when dissipated, there was no island left. You were just showing off now. Nerina laughed. Watch this, he said. The land started to appear again, but rather than the island of the garden, a different island appeared. Mountains, desert, sea, tundra, and green. An entire ecosystem appeared then suddenly. A city unfolded through the mist, a city like none other in this world. That, I remember. Nerina's eyes widened. A city from your past life. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr e/Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter 597. Chapter 593, Domain of the Dreamer. Happy birthday to Dragonborn Saga. The novel is 3 years old, since January 6, 2018. In a way, John displayed an omnipotent power when it came to handling the central demi-reality inside his domain. He can basically shift reality to unknown limits. If it is just that, then it wouldn't be a problem, but he can save and recall many shapes of the demi-reality if he just wishes for it. He can make it into the Garden Island, or he can make it exactly look like a modern city. More to that, he can keep using those two forms at the same time. Also, if he stored an item or a living organism from reality in one of them, then changed the appearance of the demi-reality, then recalled the previous one, that item or living organism will still be there. But the question still stands. Is that place an illusion or is it a reality? John had no answer even though he is the one in control, and so he asked Nerina, who is still more experienced than him. However, she didn't answer. She kept looking at the city he fabricated and just spoke one sentence. Let me in. Let me inside that demi-reality. It wasn't something unusual to request. He was planning on letting her explore it anyway. Still, he brazenly walked to her and held her up from her waist before stepping over the rail and carrying her with him in one arm. Just as he jumped in, it felt as if they were falling through the clouds as their vision became cloudy. Once they passed the cloud, they were falling towards the city down there in free-fall speed. John merely used a bit of power, and before they reached the building's level, their falling speed got reduced greatly, and Nerina could see her reflection on the glass-like buildings as she was being carried by John all the way down to the wide, clean ground. This was totally another level from what she could even think about. She looked at the sky above and saw a normal-looking sky with no trace left of the domain. There was heat to the sun, and it felt rather comfortable as the warm breeze went by. An illusion. No, none of this feels like an illusion. Magica could be felt through the entire place, but the structure of this place was really well made. As she said, that's an entire realm. I need to know more? What else can you do? She asked. I'm not limited to anything, really, he said, and started to move his staff nonchalantly. As he did so, the clouds of the sky above started moving at a frightening speed, giving a mild shock to Nerina, who later realized that John was going fast forward in time. Instantly, day became night. She narrowed her eyes and started thinking, but John wasn't done yet. He hit the ground with his staff, and without even moving any magica from within him, reality was bent to his will, and many things started to form. At first, plain white silhouettes of various shapes appeared. They had a network of vertical and horizontal lines outlining their basic forms before being completely covered with a surface that started to gain color. People, not just one or two. John just populated the whole city with people. They were coming, going, speaking, laughing, driving metal carriages, and shouting through small glass slates. The sudden change overwhelmed Nerina and made her look around herself like crazy as the city lights made everything look as clear at night as it is at day. John then raised his hand, and the entire city, no, the entire time, stopped across the realm. This is not me doing anything, to be honest. I just told the domain to generate these images of people based on information in my head. John said, I think I get it more, she said before asking, how did you give it such a functionality? I used the binary enchanting to give the domain an ability to calculate inputs and outputs. That, however, was just a very basic functionality that was the foundation to this demi-reality. On top of it, I laid a set of normal instructions that guide the outpost of the base enchantment and process it into different results by a series of interlocking nodes of spells. The last part was to store and display the result, and here we are. I just give an order, the domain functions as I want, and displays it in this demi-reality. So, it is not completely an illusion. Nerina clapped her head, not for the most part, since in some way, it exists on a sensual level. But aren't illusions are the things that only exist on a sensual level with no real self whatsoever? He refuted. Nerina started thinking, what you say sounds like a paradox. Is it enough for reality to be sensual, or should it be completely fabricated out of matter? Logically, it is the second choice, but John started thinking, it can also be a matter of perspective. Indeed, she nodded. Imagine yourself a god. I hate that way of thinking. Fine, imagine yourself an original spirit. One day, you used your powers and created a world. To you, is this world less real than whatever your origin is? She raised a point. But these are two different matters. God, or those original spirits, give life through souls. Once a life is born, it is independent and free until it returns to its creator. Suddenly a thought erupted in Nerina's head, and she linked all the missing mysteries John wasn't able to comprehend. Of course he wasn't able to comprehend. Actually, he is preventing himself from comprehending because if he did, he wouldn't be able to maintain this thing. So John, Nerina spoke slowly. You were right. The soul is given to form life. Sometimes, artificial souls like those of the Daedra can create similar effects to the souls of the living, and so does simple artificial souls based on simple ideas. And, think about it. You were thinking about whether this demi-reality is something real or an illusion. The answer is neither. She pointed at him with a smile. Boy, you're an enigma even though you always fail to realize it. So you understood something? He asked. She laughed and nodded. You will love this, she said and continued as she walked around the wide pavement looking around at the people which were created by this realm. The smaller the scale, the more complicated the mechanism. Yours is ingeniously simple, even though you can't fathom its brilliance. Do you remember what you called it just now? This place. A demi-reality. Yes, not exactly an illusion, even though it is not completely real. It is a fabricated reality, an artificial reality, or John's face twitched as he spoke the next words. A virtual reality. That's the word. A complete virtual reality, which completely duplicates the information you process in your subconscious and releases a world of ideas, of thoughts. She said, I don't get it. John shook his head. It sounds logical, but that's just the basics. I fabricated an entire reality from my thoughts, and you turned it into a dream? Nerina pointed. A dream. John realized the meaning, but the mental barrier he placed upon himself still continues. Nerina held her head. Your dream is composed of ideas that exist through your consciousness. It is all real, but you are the one who makes it like that, and it solely depends on you. Brilliant. How can you be awesome and sit so stupid at the same time? Nerina could no longer contain herself, as if she was both happy and frustrated. She then walked towards one of the people John fabricated. The person was a female who held a strange gadget which she pointed towards other people who were smiling towards it. Nerina held the camera thing, threw it off, and then slapped the woman. John. Just that word was enough to cause an incredible change. John instantly was overwhelmed by the feeling and watched as the camera woman suddenly turned towards Nerina. Her brown eyes immediately turned blue, and then started to glitch. The glitching didn't last a second before the camera woman completely vanished. It vanished from this reality, but suddenly, it appeared in John's head. Fuck! He shouted. He understood it all at once. That glitching just now, it was some sort of zero-sum. The camera woman, who was part of this virtual reality, realized that she is in fact an idea from John's head. Something that strayed off by the process of creation and was placed here as an application of what he thought to be an illusion. That woman was just an idea all along, and its source is John. Just like anything else in this world. Information. John would just think, and the information would leak from his brain and take form as he said once. In other words, everything here is a part of him. So, what do we call the elusive ideas that leak from one's head and dance around without the need of their creator's will? Nerina asked. Dreams. John replied. And what does that make you, John? She asked again. A dreamer, he replied. His reply was enough for the entire virtual reality characters which populated this place to suddenly glitch and disappear at once. The whole wide population, which John used to fill this city with, is now gone. Only he remained to hold his head alongside the grinning Nurina. The dreamer must never be aware that he is dreaming, else the dream shall end, she said, announcing that she solved the entire mystery. Once the master, always the master. John sat on a bench as he rested his aching head and massaged his temples. This is so ridiculous, he said. Hands down, you may have just surpassed every mysticism wizard we know of. Nurina sat beside him. You may also be the first mage in existence to experience the state of the godhead and return to tell the tale. John was holding his head from an agonizing strike of headache. Just now, he was in a state of an overmind controlling every character in this virtual reality with his subconscious, and he didn't even realize it even once until Nurina slapped it into him. More importantly, the ideas which formed those characters and personalities were also unaware that they are part of John, so once they realized it, they instantly glitched. Why? Because these ideas realized who they are and what is their origin, which resulted in them returning to the overmind. Godhead, John sighed. Indeed, the dreamer of our world. Nurina nodded as she watched the beautiful city with John. So, if we are aware of the dreamer, why don't we glitch off the face of reality as well? John asked. Nice question. Well, the answer would be that I most certainly don't know, but there is an obvious clue in how the dreamer disappeared from the world. Let's say that when the dreamer zero-summed, they did so because they connected themselves entirely to the nimidium and reached the higher awareness, almost endangering the dream and the dreamer that make our reality. So, I can say that our world is much more stable than this virtual reality you created. Even if you realize the dream, you won't get zero-summed until you start acting against that dream or endanger it. Part of this reason is due to our psychology. We may know that something is real, but deep down, we still can't fathom or believe that we are mere aberrations in a dream. Let's say that the dreamer doesn't care as well. John laughed as he heard Nurina's explanation. You sure I was supposed to graduate as an apprentice? He asked. Quit bitching, she smiled. Now recreate those people again. John massaged his eyes with his fingers and held the bridge of his nose. I can't, he said. Huh? You just caused an apocalypse in my head, remember? You made all those characters glitch. I need to have enough mental energy to do this again. Well, my bad. Nurina smiled, acting a little bit cute. John looked at her with a cringe before her cute act grew stiff. Did you just think, why is that 200-years-old hag like me acting all cute, right? Nope, I can read it. You know, it's all over your face. Nurina started pinching John's ear and hitting his shoulder mercilessly while he was fighting her off before, out of nowhere, the other four sins artifacts appeared in front of where John and Nurina were. Those are? Oh, it is good they are here. John shook off Nurina and commanded his artifacts to reform. Greed turned into the coat he always wears. Wrath reformed itself into a skeleton warrior wearing a samurai bone armor. Gluttony turned into a red scarf and flew around John's collar. And finally, lust took the form of the naked and stunning woman, Venus. Nurina started coldly at Venus. Cover up, John said before Nurina does something to lust, which caused a set of winter clothes to appear on Venus, who was obviously bothered by the fact. John thought for a while before coming up with an idea. Maybe we can recreate people in the realm again. How so? Nurina asked. While the weakest of my sins in terms of combat, lust has Venus, which is a very independent personality with her own ideas. She was once a Netic maid that lived in the first era before surrendering her soul for eternity to Sanguine. I won her from him, but before her death, her soul entered lust rather than returning to Aetherius. Interesting, Nurina said. What can she do then? Watch this, John laughed. Lust, I want you to temporarily merge yourself into this virtual reality and pilot all the roles I give you. Venus smiled towards Nurina and phased out of her clothes before bowing to John and fading into thin air. Before Nurina even got to rage, multiple characters started to emerge as if they came back from glitching or something. Nerina and John looked at the place around them as the world was being refilled with characters. John smiled and allowed the flow of people to flow as he snapped his fingers. So, Nerina seemed not understanding what John did differently from the other time. Venus is an incredible actress, so she has the capacity to play a full city by herself. On top of that, she is the sin with the most indivisibility from me and can think independently, so she doesn't think that she is a part of me. This means you can't make them glitch through using me again. He said, but they are still her. Well, let's say that I added a little bit of censorship on what they can and can't hear. Nerina laughed and looked around the lively modern city. This little amaranth of yours, it may be actually worth a shot, she said as she finally submitted to the beauty of the city. Well, you could do whatever you want, John said and stood off the bench. If you want to get out, overload your surroundings with magicka, and you will find yourself outside. Where are you going? She asked. I'll bring the others, he replied with a smile. I think my domain's completion is worth celebrating. As he left in a pillar of light heading towards the sky, Nerina put on a large grin of pride. Her apprentice has surpassed her in almost 10 years only. But now, there was that thing which caught her eye once she arrived in this city. Not too far behind the bench she was sitting on, Nerina could see a glass display with one crazy-looking black dress. She walked towards the display and saw her reflection on the dress that suited her taste pretty much. She looked around and saw some of the domain characters going in and out of the shop with a fancy name on top of it. She may have always given John lists for things to buy, but now he delivered her an entire city with bizarre and exotic items. How in oblivion can she refuse? Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr/e/Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter 599. Chapter 594, Old Friends 1. During the past 3 days, John has notified his people that he is going back to finish the domain. While it is rather a surprising choice of timing, the benefits of a complete domain outweigh the time spent creating it. Thus, Alina returned to manage the company for those 3 days with all the dragon cults and Blackbriar competition going around. Unlike the usual, the enemies felt the presence of John being absent, and thus started to violently push towards Winterhold. Maven Blackbriar openly visited Windhelm and opened a few businesses by her own hand, displaying her ultimate smugness by doing this in John's backyard, as everyone calls Windhelm. On the other hand, the dragon cults have started to systematically release dragers from the ancient sealed crypts around Winterhold, which started to cause a situation of instability. The response of Winterhold, however, was swift and decisive. As if showing off with their wealth, the Dare Bank immediately bought everything that would allow Maven businesses to function and ruin them in one day. It was rather an aggressive move by the DDC, but the situation proved them to be superior when it comes to their presence and grasp over their lands. They still revived the businesses they ruined immediately, but only after reclaiming them from Maven and changing the faces of the management. In retaliation to what Maven started, the Dare Bank for Investment renovated a house in Rift Inn and reinforced it with cold steel bars before hanging a DDC sign on top of it in an ultimate provocation, as taking Rift Inn is only a matter of time to them. As for the wild undead by the dragon cult, the response here came in the bloodiest of methods. As the college mages were dispatched to hunt down the undead, the Black Operations team of the Dare Mercenaries, Team Zero, started to make fast arrests around the hold and drove a number of people to the Jarl. During interrogation, those suspects were led to a secret warehouse under the supervision of Jarl Career, where a complete dragon skeleton was brought. Jellinar personally led the interrogation as she ordered each suspect to start stepping on top of the dragon skull, which everyone was completely up against. They cried and shouted, displaying their extreme irritation to the order when they were physically forced to step on the skull, which indicated their identity. In Skyrim and many other provinces, there is an unspoken tradition that stepping on the symbol of one's god is the ultimate form of sacrilege. Obviously, stepping on a fully dead dragon is nothing scary unless you're a worshipper. With the dragon cultists exposed, an immediate execution was carried out under the full extent of the martial law of wartime, since the dragon cult is currently announced as an enemy of Winterhold as an entire domain. In order to keep the matters in full control, Jellinar had already replaced the hold guards around the Jarl and the guards of the important points of Winterhold with Dare agents disgusted as guards to keep control of the situation either way. It was a precaution that Jon left hanging for the right time. During those 3 days, the Dares proved to be in total control of both Winterhold and their business. No one can even jump into their backyard, and it was quite impossible for a domestic attack to shake the peace. Even still, they already had prior knowledge of all the spies roaming around the hold, but only let them operate to satisfy the curiosity of the outside forces. On the 4th day, however, Jon made an appearance in the city of Sarthal as he walked right into the main office of the company and then started inviting his friends and family to the tower. With the king back on his throne and the kingdom properly returning to its normal functions, the hold got quieter very fast. Back in his special residence on top of the tower, Jon gathered Alina, Jellinar, Miranda, Wulfur, Isha, Mirren, Hilda, and Jonrad as he stood in front of a secret magic formation which he prepared at some time. As you all know, I went out to finish the domain, and the results turned out to be far greater than expected. As he rubbed Nefertiti's fluffy fur, Jon said, as she was lying on his arm and looking up to him, "Boy, enough with the suspense. Show us what you made and embarrass yourself already." Jonrad said as he laughed before getting poked by Hilda. "Son, I am sure you did well. Don't listen to your father. He tried to research that thing you did once in the past, and he failed terribly." Hilda said, "I am not a wizard," Jonrad retorted. "Hubby, I was waiting for it for 3 days, so please hurry up." Alina approached Jon as she put her hair behind her ear, knowing that she would look cuter this way. "Wifey, the thought of showing it off to you made me put extra effort to perfect it all just for you," Jon replied. The two lovebirds flirted as everyone else was getting nauseated by the intense pink atmosphere the two of them radiated. Definitely the most headache-inducing scene when those two start to mingle together. Asterisk show. Star. As Jon and Alina heard the familiar sound of Magicka charging through a circuit, the two of them looked to the side and saw Jellinar holding Nefertiti, who snuck off Jon's hand and activated the teleportation array he laid out. Instantly, a portal formed, and Jellinar laughed naughtily as she jumped through. "Going in first?" she said. "That damn wench," Alina cursed. "Gotta be back before lunch." Even Wulfur hopped through. "You guys take your time," and Hilda dragged Jonrad in as well. "I think I'll pass. I don't trust that boy enough to walk through a portal he makes." Jonrad complained. "Just get in already." Hilda pulled him by force. And also the rest went in, leaving Jon and Alina to be the last. All of them are extremely horrible. Alina felt the need to scold everyone, but Jon was laughing wryly. "Don't worry about it," he said. "They are screwed." And so he took her hand in his and passed through the portal together. Soon after, Jon and Alina appeared in his domain in a large forest area with entangled alien trees and a strong feeling of nature surrounding the whole location. Everything around them looked and felt magical to the max. Strange herbs were growing on the land due to the effect of the temporal shifts and climate changes, which gave the whole place a spark of fantasy of its own. "This looks beautiful," Alina exclaimed as she parted hands with Jon before crouching in front of some plants and checking them out. "I've never seen such flowers before." "Yes, they're exclusive to the temporal space of this domain. I tried to take them outside, but they started wilting right away. I don't think processing them here will be good either," Jon said. "I understand. It is temporarily isolated from this world, so it can exist in this space, but can't exist outside." Alina nodded. "Indeed. I think if something is injected with more existential essence, such as spiritual energy, it would allow it to exist outside." Jon nodded. "You're making me feel hot with all that magic nerd, Firemane." Alina made a smile as she stood against him and stuck her body to his while exchanging a kiss. "By the way, where are the others?" We can't shamelessly put on a show if there is nobody around. Alina asked. Your bad habits are becoming worse than mine. John shook his head. I've sent them directly to the middle of the fray. Oh, I knew you were up to no good. She smiled happily and entangled with John in passionate adult actions which will be censored for the sake of moving up the plot. 30 minutes later, the two of them stopped their intimate engagement and decided to head further into the domain while interlocking their arms like how couples do. John revealed that his domain is actually a floating island, which made her feel even hotter, but the two were not going to waste more time. He immediately took her to the area where the virtual reality he created was located and hastily explained to her the whole thing before she asked one question. John, where are the others? She asked, narrowing her eyes as if she had already found the answer. They're in there? John pointed at the virtual city. You just threw them in? She smiled as she made sure she was correct. I just didn't want to explain everything to everyone once again. John replied with a cheeky smile. What's their situation? Let's see. John turned to the virtual city, extended his elbow towards Alina, inviting her to join arms with him, and taking a step towards the virtual city together. And their things looked amazing. I'm glad you like it. While Alina was still walking in her fancy dress, looked between the people coming and going, then started looking at the city. In a strange moment of realization, Alina kicked the ground and started levitating up the sky. The sun was warm as it shed its golden rays on the buildings. Strange enough, the domain was mimicking the same time on Mundus at the moment, and as Alina watched the skyscrapers rise to heaven like pillars to the sky, she landed on one of them and surveyed the city from the south. Not too far from her was a sea and a beach dotted with buildings. Wide roads uniquely encircled the city until it all started to run around the city in circles. To the north, there were mountains at a very large distance until the city ended. The mountains were covered in snow and the city was generally cold, but from its sheer size of both buildings and population, the city itself was defying the winter. Many hot steam pipes ran through the buildings that looked either rich or poor, making a pattern she recognized. Also, the roads of some parts of the city were unique to something she recognized. Alina looked around and saw John waiting for her beside a fancy-looking metal wagon and dressed in something that looks like the clothes of this strange era. She immediately teleported down to him. This city, it is Winterhold, she said. It is, John replied. You like it? You recreated Winterhold in the image of your previous world, she said and looked around with a surprised face. Everything I am seeing, the apartment-style housing, the steam pipe system, the roads, and even the expansion between Sarthal, Winterhold, and Sarkhead, that's... Alina struggled to find words before looking at John. That's your plan all along? The point where you aim to develop the city? She asked. John smiled and nodded. I don't expect it to reach this point in my lifetime anyway, John said. Our children shall be the ones to achieve this, if they are worthy of making it possible. I'll make sure they are, Alina said and got closer to him, slowly embracing one another. By the way, what is that? She asked, pointing at the metal wagon. I remember from the nightmare realm of Vermina that there were things like this that were called cars. You are right, John said as he turned around to look at the fancy car. It's a sports car, but I have completely forgotten all the car brands from my past life, so I recreated the fanciest looking thing I can remember. A sports car. A sports car? Alina widened her eyes, looking at the black car. Sports car? What sort of sport does it participate in? Shouldn't there be some sort of a sport for this car to be called a sports car? Racing, I guess. John said, I don't really know. It's all about speed and performance, so they called it a sports car. I was just teasing you. She smiled. John smiled and shook his head from his cheeky wife as he opened the car door for her. She held her dress as she was about to go in, but he stopped her. Maybe we should put you in something that fits the theme, he said while looking at her clothes. My dress doesn't fit, she said. He held her hand and raised it up. Just give me a spin, he said. Having some pride in her sense of fashion, Alina reluctantly spun as she held John's hand before her dress to suddenly start reforming. It turned from her wide garb and coat into a slender shirt short skirt, and thigh-high stockings, while her shoes became black high heels and a black coat manifested on her. With her straight hairstyles and natural immense beauty, Alina looked at the glass of the building beside her and held her breath for a few seconds. "Firemane," she spoke. "Yeah," he replied. "You do that to anyone else of the girls, and I'll start chopping their heads, understand?" John laughed uncontrollably as Alina monopolized the rights of being pampered all by herself. "After you." He immediately pointed towards the car as she walked in with absolute satisfaction. As John walked in through the driver's seat, he adjusted the size of the car to fit his large body, and Alina started smiling. "I just noticed something," she said. "What?" "Those things called cars are suitable if we want to do it somewhere far quiet." Seeing how naughty she's acting, John covered his face before slowly giggling. "Not original, but 5 points for that fast inspiration of yours." "Thanks." John took the driving wheel and started thinking. "I don't remember how to drive a car either, so drive yourself, car," he said, and the motor started itself. "Oh, the perks of being in your own reality." She laughed. "At least I shouldn't embarrass myself in front of you now. How about we go see the others embarrassing themselves?" he asked. "Lead the way." The car started moving and joined the other stream of cars before John purposely lightened the traffic in order to drive at full speed. As Alina discovered, this was a futuristic version of Winterhold, where the northern part of the entire hold became a metropolis buzzing with life. Alina may have witnessed some of John's visions before about his past life, but this time was the one with the most realistic vibe to it. In a way, this kind of future wasn't half bad at all. John started explaining everything about this strange city. While doing so, some people started to appear all around the city who were doing interesting actions. One was a buff Nord in modern clothing playing his guitar on the sidewalk and singing in a style befitting of his deep voice. A crowd gathered around him as his hat was being filled with money. "Never knew Wolford could sing," Alina spoke. "Well, everyone has their own style." John laughed. Not much after that, a group of Khajiit teenagers were drawing graffiti on some buildings before getting chased by Argonian policemen. A young black Khajiit girl distracted the policemen and started making them run in circles until they started running into each other and collapsing together. "Way to go, girl." John whistled to Nefertiti, who kept smiling as she made more mischief. On the opposite sidewalk, Alina noticed a Dunmare woman walking in a very luxurious fur coat and holding tons of bags as she walked out of a very luxurious shop. "Isn't that?" Nurina's rotten personality is still taking over. John laughed as he waved out of the car to Nurina, who reacted by lowering her sunglasses to look at whoever was that. As the car drove further into the city, John saw a big gathering around a restaurant as the road sign turned red. There, a large red-headed woman was sitting in front of many delicate-looking plates of sweets and a gathering of people around her. As soon as a signal was given, Hilda started devouring the sweets at a rapid pace, almost finishing her portion within 1 minute. "Mom has a sweet tooth, all right," Alina laughed. "And hopefully not diabetes." John sighed, thanking the heavens this is a virtual world. Not far after that, a bank rang its alarms as 2 girls ran out of it with bags of money. One was a Dunmare, the other was a Red Guard. Isha and Jeliner started shooting their firearms at the police before noticing John and Alina in their car. "Hurry, hurry, hurry! Go, go, go!" The 2 girls ran towards the car and tried to get in, but John sneered at them. "This car only has 2 seats," he said. "What sort of vehicle would only have 2 seats? Do something!" Isha shouted. "Fine." Peep, peep. A nearby parked car made noises as its doors opened for them, and the 2 started running towards it immediately, and it drove them away. "Those girls!" Alina held her head as she let out a sigh. "Well, they all surprised me." John laughed. Where are the others?" she asked. "I know where Dad is," John said. "Don't tell me you did something bad to him. You're gonna love this one." John didn't go too far this time. He just parked the car at a nearby street, went down, and walked in a plaza among very large towers. Alina followed him casually, but she couldn't see John Rad anywhere. Just as she was about to ask, a metal object fell from the sky on fire. Gunshots were heard up above the sky, and the characters started escaping from the surroundings. "John, get me down!" Finally, Alina looked up as she heard Jonrad shouting. He was there above a large tower that had a great antenna coming off its top, and he was barely able to hang up to the antenna with one arm. While he was in that situation, several fighter planes started attacking him with gunfire as he blacked it with magic and retaliated at them. "John, stop this." Just like that movie. Alina kept looking at John as he laughed with obvious malice and shook her head. "Get him down, please." "Why? This is so much fun." "Is it?" "I assure you, he's enjoying it." While she kept staring at him, John came up with an idea. "Why don't you take the car and drive it? It is not that hard since it's not actually a machine," he said. "Really?" She focused on the car. "How do I drive it then?" "Just imagine it like a hovering spell. Venus will guide you if there is any problem, and if you want any item, tell Venus to give you money. That's how Nurina is buying things." "So you let the girls rob a bank, just for fun?" "Of course." John took off, leaving Alina with the car, as the two of them forgot about Jonrad, who was stuck up the tower fighting planes. John felt a strange anomaly in the domain, and as he approached it, he found himself walking into a bar with a lot of people singing and drinking during the day. While it seemed unusual, John focused on the elf, who was singing on a stage in an interesting mix of rhymes and melodies. The song went on about lost love and broken souls as the characters filling the space started applauding for the singer until they left the stage and headed towards John to hug him in their embrace. "John, I really missed you," they said. John smiled and returned the embrace for that old friend. "Missed you too, Mir." Another figure appeared in the bar. This time, it was the usually three-quarters naked Venus. "Give Mirren and Miranda a tour like the one the others had," he said. "But master, they're already registered to have," Venus replied as she checked her memory. "Do as I said," John said before turning to the twins. "Venus will give you a small introduction to the city before making you choose a game mode to play." "A game mode?" Mirren asked. "A role to play," John said before looking at the TV screen of the bar. A crime show. The TV showed Jeliner and Isha shooting with guns at their chasers. A car show. The TV showed Alina speeding through the roads with no traffic around her. An art show. The TV showed Nurina buying everything that looked glamorous or luxurious. A comedy show. The TV showed Hilda wearing a sumo suit and running through opponents. Or a shit show. The TV showed Jonrad still battling old airplanes in bad weather where he can only get angrier. Crime show. Comedy show. The twins chose different things in the same breath before looking at each other surprised they were not in the same mind for once, and just brushed it off as each was going to do their own thing. "This way, Master Mir and Mistress Miranda." Venus guided the two outside the bar as John just returned to his heavy atmosphere. There was little he could do for Mir. After a while, Venus returned to Leon as well as the four other sins. The bar became silent, and all the characters left the place like robots. "Venus, create a character with the last entries of Mir," John ordered. "By your orders." Just like so, Venus started fabricating a character with an appearance similar to that of Mir, an expressionless one with a lifeless attitude of an NPC. John kept staring at his friend's image for a while before offering that floating tear in his hand to the image, and in an act of arcane fusion, he kept that tear as the last possible memory of Mir in that character. "Well, this is sad." Yet in a deep part of the bar, a voice spoke. "Sigh." John couldn't help but let out a long breath and steel his nerves for what was coming. The owner of the voice was a man sitting alone in a dark corner, who was someone that even Venus didn't know about. Her reaction to it was by attempting to categorize this invader as either a character or a foreign entity failed as John signaled her to stop and for the other sins to go on with their business. "I've seen you putting on this appearance once before," John spoke, that time at the heart of chaos. "Of course, my friend, A shadow like myself finds it hard to imitate his usual image in a reality where he shouldn't exist, much like your friend Mir here. Shadow spoke as he walked closer to John. John and Shadow meet again after a while. This time, however, Shadow took the form of a human male. Weird enough, his appearance was more visible this time than that in the heart of chaos. He was wearing normal black jeans, a white shirt, a black jacket, and a black baseball cap. His face was that of an Asian man with black hair and mildly handsome features. "She is very beautiful." Shadow stood beside John and commented on Mir's character. "Mir prefers to be addressed with he." "Sorry." Shadow raised his hands apologetically. John didn't seem to be speaking, but Shadow, on the other hand, was looking at John with all smiles. "You beautiful motherfucker." Shadow laughed. "I know you are in a heavy mode, but look at you. You finally made it." Shadow slapped John on the shoulder. "Creating your own reality. Do you have any idea how hard that was for me? I've seen immortals fail to achieve it, but you defied a whole set of rules and still made it the way you want." "Whatever," John replied. "This is it, friend. We can finally advance further with our plans." Shadow's excitement didn't die even with John's cold attitude. Having more than one reality is advantageous. The enemies will surely attempt to destroy everything in their wake, so make sure to hide all those you hold dear in your reality and put a lock on everything. John didn't reply as he opened a bottle with his teeth and gave Shadow his back. "The heart of chaos is on the move, friend. All the stories shall be rewritten." "Are you done?" "Me? Yes, a long time ago." Shadow replied. "It is your turn to be done. Once the heart of chaos makes his move, you, me, and the rest should be there to maintain the narrative." For more light on Heart of Chaos thingy, check out SCP-3812. There's a new video on YouTube that finally explains my main inspiration from it and its effect on the DNU multiverse. John ignored Shadow for now and kept staring at Mir's character as if to recall its features for the last time before waving his hand and ordering the character to go away. "I can help with that, you know," Shadow said. "If you want me to go down and fetch his ghost, I can recreate your friend as a shadow demon." "Is that what you do to your loved ones?" John asked. "Oh, come on. Don't make it sound like it is a bad thing. Shadow demons are residual memories that regain the structure of their former selves. It is some sort of reincarnation, but they are not really independent souls anymore. Something like those things you call data creatures." "Sorry, I'm not interested in your offer." "Whatever." Shadow shrugged his shoulders. "I just came to say congratulations anyway. I hope when the time comes, we sail through the abyss together once again. This may be the last time you see me until then." "What about the other shadows?" John asked. "Well, you'd have to ask them yourself," Shadow said and walked out of the bar. John knew very well that Shadow was never a single entity, not someone that can be traced as one person. Shadow is a link through him which many entities use to reach out to him. That Shadow just now was the one that met him the least. In fact, he is also the same Shadow that saved him in the heart of chaos once. Aside from that, the other shadows are nothing but ghosts that are simply there to drive him nuts more than what he already is. That is the truth about Shadow. But now the time has finally come. The time to face those old ghosts and be ready to face their old grudges. One of those grudges is right in Winterhold, specifically in the college itself. A large, innocent-looking floating orb known as the Eye of Magnus. And the ones who are coming for it are the monks of the ancient order of the Sigics. And they're finally moving towards it. John switched the screen in front of him towards Alina. It is time for her to take the lead of this dangerous fate. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr.ee/Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter 602. Chapter 596, to Blackreach. After the construction of the new dock of Sarkhead Town in the most frigid part of Winterhold, the Dare mercenaries and the Dare started to mobilize a lot of resources between the main city and the new town in order to keep an active front. Just the other day, John and Wulfur erected a large statue on the shore of the town for a great warrior, riding a bear and holding an axe, with many small statues following the main one. This depiction was for Isgrimor and his companion during the return, the sacred event which happened on the land of that place. In a way, this town was to be another low blow to the unfriendly neighbor known as Dawnstar, and a way to spread the population of Winterhold, making it the official fourth settlement. But as always, there was a secret behind the construction of this town, something that John was planning for since the early phases of his business. The ancient dwarven ruins of Alftand were somewhere between New Sarthal and Sark Head, and John wasn't ready to let any lowlife get their hands on his most important treasure or spread any news about it before he started claiming its riches for himself. This drove him to discuss fortifying the Wayward Pass with Jarl Career and spending a fortune of his own pocket in order to build a quick garrison and some towers in that area. Usually, Wayward Pass is a point that is almost impossible to conquer, since most of the Winterhold scouting forces cover that place well, and a small militia can defend it against a dragon even. However, John wanted that spot closed, and if the Jarl wouldn't close it for him, he would go and collapse the mountain on it if needed. By the end of the week, John had 3 strongholds in very vital areas: New Sarthal, Sark Head, and Wayward Pass. Those 3 points triangulated around the ancient ruins of Alftand. Why all the control madness? It is because today is the day when John conquers an actual dwarven city active with its army of machines and its population of Falmer. By the dawn of this day, John stood on top of the cliff descending down the ice mountain to the secret entrance of Alftand, which by its part, a secret entrance to the lost city beneath Winterhold Blackreach. Prior to this, John had met the mage known as Septimus Cygnus, the madman who turned out to be Nurena's ex-husband and the servant of the Daedric Prince of Forbidden Knowledge, Hermias Mora. Septimus has explained to John, in his crazy gestures, how to access Alftand and gave him the key to the most secure city. This key was a ball object with the size of John's fist, known as the Attunement Sphere, and it is an object capable of performing tonal manipulation in some unhearable frequencies to the normal senses. John has spent some time studying the tones produced by the sphere and has deducted a few key runes to the ancient Dwemer magic. Still, invading Blackreach is one thing, and reaching it is an entirely different dilemma that John has planned painstakingly for. Unlike how things are done in the game, real-life ancient ruins are not only filled with enemies, but with far more untold dangers. Every piece of wall has the potential to collapse if a fight between the explorers and the ruined dwellers led to an accident. There's an endless list of unfortunate possibilities that will surely turn into a disaster. Still, the sight of 100 Dare troopers was magnificent enough to settle the worries in John's heart. This won't be the first conquest he takes part in, but the first official one under his name. They are practically going to attack a city that has a standing army. The plan is simple. 100 troopers will be all it takes to delve into the ruins under the leadership of Njal the Lioness, leader of the exploration teams. Once the threats are taken care of, the excavators shall join. The mages shall coordinate between the exploration team and the excavation team to deal with any issue of a magical nature. Our main objective is to reach the deepest spot of Tower Alftand, since we are entering from the top and heading towards the bottom. Once we reach the deepest point, Boss John will lead the advance into the unknown underground area. All the assigned captains of 10 must notify their troops about the threat we are facing, which will vary from lethal Dwemer animunculi to warmongering Falmer savages. I suppose you all know what to do. Don't disappoint. While the team successfully defeated the spiders without casualties, John realized that even with his troopers, this whole expedition was going to take longer than what he anticipated or wished for. He let out a sigh and walked ahead, leaving the place for the excavation and scavenging team to come and scrap all that's left from the fight. One duty was left for the exploration team after getting rid of the dwarven animunculi, and that is sealing the wall hatches which produce those pesky machines. John has fabricated a sealing technique that uses tonal manipulation to disturb the dwarven constructs, something akin to an EMP effect that lasts as long as the seal stands. This way, he will completely stop the ruins from producing more enemies and make it safe to conquer the city until they find the secret animunculi production line. The plan was perfect. One thing, however, John didn't foresee. He downloaded a mod before his reincarnation, which will make him almost want to kill himself in the following days. It has been 10 days since I posted the last chapter. I may have not told anyone, but I am having some PhD qualification exams. I will be extremely busy for the entirety of June and July, but I will keep writing for the sake of the world. No riots, okay? Chapter 597, Farmer's Slaughter. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr/e/Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter 605. The dwarven ruins are either stones or metal. Rarely one would find anything that would break this theme, which makes the whole thing impossible to even dwell in. The fact that an entire nation existed in these sorts of places is baffling since throughout their buildings, the whole thing seemed very inconvenient. When the Dwemer disappeared from the world, little was left behind aside from their weapons, cities, and machines. Some of the clutter survived as well, such as plates and tableware, but that's just it. Where are their books, their means of entertainment, their non-stone and non-metal personal items? The answer is either it was scavenged by someone before, or it decayed through the ages. It is 3,700 years too late to ask that question anyway. John can't be the only explorer to reach these places all that time. Many ruins thieves must have come and gone. It still is depressing to the point where he was going through many parts of the rubble looking for fossilized things. The place was so clean that what he found was only a rattle toy that seemed to have been badly damaged. Aside from the pointless exploration, the only thing to scavenge here was loads upon loads of dwarven metal, and the only notes to take were those about the ancient dwarven machinery and their applications. Meanwhile, the team ahead focused on fighting the dwarven animunculi, which started to get tougher the more they advanced. It started with hordes of dwarven spiders, and now it is the dwarven spheres, the main foot soldiers of the dwarven ruins. The dwarven spheres were the same description of the word. They were moving balls with the height of 2 feet that would love by using segments of their parts as wheels. Once they arrived near an enemy, they would unpack into an animunculi with a height of 5 to 6 feet, whose upper part is humanoid in shape and its lower part is still in the sphere's shell. Those animunculi would use one bladed arm and another arm equipped with a crossbow to attack. Relentless as they were, the exploration team had to change their tactics with the spheres. One group to shield from their attacks and bolts, another group was to keep them at bay with their spears, and the 1 or 2 big-bodied troopers would use their hammers to completely shatter the animunculi to smithereens. However, the situation completely shifted to all the grim shades of black when the team ran into the first dwarven centurion, a metallic construct that stood on the towering height of 5 to 6 meters, almost 19 feet. What can mortal men do when facing such horror? At first, the dwarven centurion was dormant in a station made of an arc of pipes that supplied it with power. From a distant observation, these dwarven centurions don't get considered in a normal animunculi assembly line, but they actually get constructed by a horde of dwarven spiders working together on the centurion station where they stand. John managed to witness all that marvel by using a set of magical spells in order to spy on the secrets of the machine works of the animunculi. But as to every happy occasion, there is always that guy who's called the party buster, which strangely rhymes with farmer. Those horrible little wicked things were present as well to ruin the mood. From some busted pipes and compromised maintenance hatches, some of those pesky farmer hid and waited for the prey they sensed from a mile away. The party was fairly underground already, and since this is farmer territory, where even the dwarven machines struggle to keep their grounds, the situation turned from a tactical confrontation with metallic machines to a head-on battle with a swarm of farmer that built their outposts in these parts of the ruins. The history of the farmer dates back to when they were once the elves that inhabited Skyrim. The Atmer in return and the Dwemer slavery has completely altered those once beautiful and elegant elves into what can now be seen as hideous savages no different than goblins. They were filled with so much malice and hatred that they survived by herding subterranean bugs which they ate and used as crafting materials and fighting hounds, all while waiting for the chance to get their hands on some of those people on the surface. This cruel and vicious race flooded in number towards John and his exploration company, intending to lay waste to the abhorrent humans, but their malice was met with something that is far more evil than whatever they have spent thousands of years cultivating. John Dare, who watched them from the forefront of his group, ordered his people to stand down and walked ahead by himself. "Those ones are mine," he said, and walked past an old dwarven gate before closing it behind him. In there, where the world descended in complete darkness, John could only hear the sounds of the farmers screeching and screaming as they surrounded him with their weapons. They couldn't see him, but the only thing they could hear was the sound of the metal on his boot clinking against the hard stone floor. "Gluttony, greed, lust," he spoke. 3 ethereal masses were summoned around him. This first was fleshy red, the second was shadowy black, and the last was glassy translucent. "Lust," John called again, and the transparent ether in front of him, and with a knife, he opened a small wound on the tip of his finger. "Goo." The one reacting was obviously gluttony, the being which longs for John's blood the most. In reaction to that, greed quickly jumped towards it, and both sins started suppressing one another. A single drop of blood started to form on John's index and slowly descended as he aimed his finger down on lust. Blood, lust. All it needed was a single drop of blood, and the lust immediately formed into a crystal to receive that blood drop. A strong sound of a drop falling into a pool of water was heard, and suddenly, the clear crystal form of lust turned red. Waves of red energy spread into the surrounding space, as every farmer walking towards John were immediately stunned by it. They started inhaling the blood scent and acting up as if something wasn't going well with them. The red lust emitted a red light, which instantly lit the place, and the image of those ugly farmer in the dwarven corridor appeared like a scene from an alien horror movie. What added fuel to the fire was the screeching that followed. Screech. The ones affected by the blood lust effect first were the Fama warmongers, the big brutes which seemed most monstrous. Their violent personalities succumbed to the call to carnage, and their weapons started swinging. Everything afterward mayhem. "Release it," John spoke as he retrieved greed and unleashed gluttony in the fray. Outside the corridor where the exploration team waited, the sound of battle came from beyond the large dwarven gate. Little was everyone worried about John, but the sound behind that wall was nothing short of horrific. It all lasted for 5 minutes with horrible shrieks and screams echoing through the walls, and it finally quieted down. And the gate opened, letting out a horrible stench. What did they see? One might ask. Initially, nothing. No one could see anything. Not the farmer, not the red lust, not even John. It was ominously dark. They heard the sound of footsteps afterward. A being came towards their direction, walking slowly and heavily. A farmer, a single creature. It had no weapons, no shields, one of its arms was cut off, and it was surely covered in blood. It raised its remaining hand towards the humans feebly, still having the audacity to show the will to fight, but all of a sudden, a large red fleshy tentacle appeared from the ceiling and rushed towards the farmer. It was caught by its head, and before it could even react, and suddenly lifted from where it stood back to the darkness it came from. A crunching sound followed, as one of the troopers brought a candlelight staff and cast one candlelight into the dark corridor. The ball of light flew ahead, making a bit of visibility and displaying what was inside. Limbs, heads, guts, pools of blood. There were things that would make anybody turn their heads and run away to barf their guts out. The troopers endured it, but this was difficult. Behind the group of troopers, a figure descended from the ceiling, making no noise, and let go of the tentacle that he held to as it separated from his hand as well. "All right, it is clear." He spoke directly, causing the troopers to jump off and aim their weapons in the other direction. The moment they saw him was when they almost wanted to complain for the rest of their lives. They held their breath, but someone asked, "Boss, there's a strange monster out there. It's just something I summoned." John replied without a care in the world. The troopers know that John summons stuff from oblivion all the time, so their worries were dismissed for the time being, and the group advanced. Meanwhile, John looked at Gluttony, which was leeching to the ceiling in a monstrous form. "Return," John commanded. A massive chunk of flesh and gore dropped from the ceiling, reformed itself into a smaller size, and stood in front of John, trying to imitate the shape of a person only to fail miserably. John laughed and dismissed it. "So, what did you gain this time?" He asked. Speaking of gaining, Gluttony has a very unique ability towards what it feasts on. You learned a tremor sensibility by eating the farmer? Impressive indeed. John recalled Gluttony and transformed it even more into the shape of a small ball with the size of his fist. He then dug his fingernails in Gluttony and caused it to expand and take over John's arm. "Let's see." John spoke and looked at his forearm, which turned out into something horrifying. John's entire forearm was engulfed by Gluttony, making it look like the hand of a monster from that horror movie where every monster is a skinned, terrifying beast with knives for fingers. John grinned as he looked at this monstrous thing, then slowly put it on the nearby wall. In his mind, everything on the other side became visible. This turned out to be very useful when he saw what he saw. Those cunning dwemer. So that's their secret. My finals aren't over, but that can't stop me from writing a chapter. Chapter 598, Immersion Backfired. Yes, we're back. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr.ee/Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter. 606. Why is that thing here? John shouted as his face, along with everybody else's, went pale right away. It's the Numidium. Wolfer spoke in complete horror. Oblivion, take me. Alina cursed with her body shaking from the sheer thought of running into the brass god. What? John looked at them in bafflement. No, that's not the bloody Numidium. Thank the seven heavens. He looked back at the gargantuan, dwarven animunculi again and felt like his head was getting lighter. To explain what he was seeing, we need to go back in time 2 days before the exploration teams enter Blackreach. 2 days ago, John ran into and annihilated hundreds of Falmer and dwarven animunculi around the Tower of Alftand as everyone kept going down. The plan wasn't just to go down, but to completely and fully invade the ruins and secure them for further operation. This meant completely disabling the dwarven steam pipes and shutting down the animunculi, which come out from the maintenance hatches regularly. This also involved completely exterminating the Falmer camps around the tower, and that meant doing the job Iskermore and his 500 companions didn't finish ages ago. It meant killing every Falmer they come across from their old to their young and burning everything, leaving no chance for the Falmer to appear from Alftand ever again. Those are just fiendish monsters, so it was all fair the way John saw it. Finally, and after a long time of fighting and securing Alftand, the group arrived at the deepest point of the tower where it was only a large hall with an altar in its center. A few dwarven animunculi appeared to defend the place, including a couple of dwarven centurions, but at this time, all the available dare troopers were very experienced in handling and defeating the dwarven machines. But there at the deepest of Alftand where John finally stood and waited for the rest of the teams to gather. Everything from that point up was secured, and all that is left is to do the magic. And by the magic, it means locating the secret door in the room. With over 100 dare troopers present, as well as some of Winterhold's elite, such as Wolfer and Jal, John stood between this force and gave a short speech. Whatever lies beyond is something I'm sure that most of you won't believe exists, but now that we have reached this point, it is time you know the true treasure which lies beyond. He said, just promise me to keep your heads low if there's something more than what you can handle. Also, there will be an important point which we need to secure once we go past this point. Jal and Wolfer will pass the details. The important point John was talking about is the Great Lift of Alftand, the ancient elevator which connects Blackreach directly to the surface where the rest of the Dare troopers wait. Still, to open the doors to Alftand, John needed to activate the ancient mechanism which unlocks the door. For that, he used the attunement sphere by inserting it in. The circular mechanism rotated in circles, and the land beneath John shook and gave off dust as the old things were finally moving. He jumped back after he retrieved the attunement sphere and watched as the stone floor opened up and revealed a stairway hidden beneath it. At the end of it was a great gate. "Here it is," John spoke, and took the lead, walking slowly to the gate, which he gently pushed. His gentle push was akin to 10 growing men moving away the heavy gates while gritting their teeth, but he walked through the gates confidently into something completely unexpected. The Dare troopers were stunned by the bright light they saw. They thought that they were finally out of Tower Alftand, but once they really took a good look outside, they were out of words. There was a sky filled with stars, a road surrounded by houses, mushrooms as tall as trees, and a city as big as Winterhold and Sarthel combined. The stars were actually the cave's ceiling dotted with luminous flora. The houses were an old dwarven ruin. The mushroom trees were a variant of the glowing mushrooms, and the city was Blackreach. Let the historians record that after 1,000 years from the Three Banners War, John Dare and his 100 troopers were the first to rediscover the great lost city of Blackreach. His words echoed, and the hearts of men started to heat up for the glory that is to come. Blackreach is the talk of legends, the myth everyone heard about when they grew up. The secret city of the great dwarves who built machines and weapons unrivaled by any race. Think of the lost city of Atlantis, then think of Blackreach. That's how it meant to many. But the party didn't even get started, and John was having more plans within his plans. He walked ahead to the base of Tower Alftand and walked around to calculate the next step. "John, the men are in good spirits." Wolfer spoke. "Your orders." "Our numbers are too few to explore this place alone." John spoke and turned around. "Many untold dangers are lying in these deep grounds. Ancient evils that remained await for eons. There are also Famr of untold numbers, and what we saw before was merely a scouting party. It will be 10 times more dangerous from now onward." The men heard John and hardened their nerves. They were the most disciplined and best troopers, each of them being able to wield their power aura well. John wasn't worried about them. "The last thing you need to know is to never pick anything up from now on. Everything here, including those mushroom trees, is rotten poison." John said, "Our next objective is to push towards the east as fast and as soon as possible. We will encounter heavy resistance from the Famr, but remember, once we set out, there is no going back." The formation was set, the plan was rechecked, the target was located. It was time to move towards the east where the Great Lift lies. Once that is secured, John and the majority of the party will wait for it to be reactivated and reach the surface with it. Once that is secured, Winterhold will have a direct way in and out of Blackreach, and the reinforcements will be unlimited. John expected to meet resistance the moment he got close to the buildings nearby, but the moment the formation was made and the group moved as one, dwarven spheres started flowing towards the team. A small fight broke out in which the machines were swiftly dismantled, but the busting skirmish caused many to come, whether they were dwarven animunculi or Famr. The cities seemed to be broken into territories, the ones that the machines hold and the ones that the Famr conquered. Each place had its advantages in offense and defense, which made the newly arriving human force to be struggling between the raids and the attacks that came from everywhere. John displayed his power time and time again as he took the lead. He was unstoppable in his pace and was very focused on both his enemies and his destination. His lightning spells would hit the Famr and turn them into ash on contact, while it would completely disturb the machines and cause them to malfunction. Once he reached the area near the Great Lift, the Famr seemed to have established a settlement around it, thus he started burning everything in his way. What was left in his wake was ash and broken Famr corpses, which he completely disintegrated right away. John seemed invincible to his men, but today was the day John's invincibility would be put to the test. Once John destroyed the farmer camp, those who survived ran towards the inner part of the city where a large fortress stood. Suddenly, a great wall of fire consumed them all without even leaving a single of both farmer and dwarven architecture. From behind the fortress stood out a dwarven machine, the greatest dwarven animunculi anyone has ever seen. It was so large it almost dwarfed the fortress it stood by, and that machine was patrolling the ancient city. Shit, John remembered something. Why is that thing here? It's the Numidiums. Wolfer spoke in complete horror. Oblivion, take me. Alina cursed with her body shaking from the sheer thought of running into the brass god. What? John looked at them in bafflement. No, that's not the bloody Numidium. Thank the seven heavens. Everyone looked at John. Throughout the dwarven ruins in Skyrim, only 3 of this menace exist, and they were set to protect the most important locations in the Dwarven Empire. John spoke. 3 of them? A machine of that scale, and nobody knows about it. Of course nobody would. They haven't been seen since the 3 Banners War over 1,000 years ago. It is the largest known dwarven animunculi ever built aside from the Numidium. It is also the superweapon of the Dwarven Empire. It is called the Dwarven Colossus, a King Kong amongst the other animunculi. It didn't exist in Skyrim as a game, but someone thought it would be immersive to download it as a mod. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr/e/Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter 606. She seemed to be heading early to the college in order to prepare for her weekly class. Still, she wasn't noticing the strange space anomaly that was following her. Someone has the galls to go after Alina. His Alina? The look on John's face was that absolute abhorrence. His gritting teeth started to make sparks fly, and veins started pooping on his face. The look on his eyes, however, was so cold that it would freeze the winter itself. This answer made the elderly elf smile. Mysticism, you say? He asked. Let's put that to the test, shall we? The elf smiled after regaining control over the mirror reality he created while John released his full aura, causing a red and black image of a dragon to manifest around him. And this was the day when the Psijic Order ran into the jealous husband known as John Dare. Chapter 600, The Psijic Visit. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr/e/Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter 609. Hiya. Wah. Tack 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 tack. 2 wizards started fighting in a distorted mirror realm dimension, physically, with their staves. You're good for a human youngling. How about this? The elderly elf coated his staff with lightning as he descended with it towards John. Piss off. Effortlessly, John pushed the attack away without suffering out a single setback. You are strong, but let's see how well you cast spells. Lightning Cage. The elderly elf said as he created a large arc of lightning around John. Reflect. John unleashed the power of his staff to reverse the magic on its caster and even improved it. Faraday's cage. The elderly elf was completely encased in a cylinder network of lightning which blocked his magic from going in or out and even started draining away his magicka. Dispel. He made a gap through the cage and teleported right through. Conjure Greater Storm Atronak. John started filling the area around the elven mage with pesky Atronax as the latter started to find trouble dodging all that. Ethereal Shift. The elf escaped all the pressure by phasing his own body away from physical harm as he immediately started widening the distance between him and John. Where to? John asked, but the elf stopped not too far and returned to his normal form. Feel the wrath. The elf mustered a terrifying amount of magic towards John, transforming it into a gush of flames. John didn't move a finger, But only he smiled as a figure appeared from the void, brandishing a bone blade and cutting the wave of fire apart, extinguishing the flame as it steps into the limelight. Your wrath can never beat that of mine. John laughed with all his evil thoughts projected into the magicka around him. The elderly elven mage felt the pressure of the creature summoned by John as it locked its focus on the man. Dangerous vibes were vibrating through the atmosphere as a battle was about to erupt. Honestly speaking, a mage of your caliber is rare to see in this land. Maybe you are the man we were told to avoid. The elven mage said. Name is John Dare. Ah, it was you indeed. The elven mage held his forehead. Listen, I am not an enemy, and we didn't realize that the girl from the prophecy is your wife. I know you didn't. You people have been staying out of the affairs of Mundus for quite some time now. John replied. So you realized who we are? The monks of Artium. Impressive. The man and elf seem to have come to an understanding. I apologize in advance for the fight that broke out due to our misunderstanding, the elf said as he dropped his hostility, but he stopped as he saw John putting on a confused, angry expression. The fuck, man? We're fighting, John said. I thought we're done, the elf wanted to reply, but John interrupted immediately. Done? We're done when I say we're done, he said with a gangster's face while cracking his fist. Round 2. Yes. Thought you would never ask. John leaped up in an arc of momentum, with his hands flashing with lightning. Double cookies. The mage sighed and teleported away before John lands and destroys the place around. So, you're the kind of guy who turns it into a fight? The elf asked. It is better this way. John didn't seem to be ceasing his madness anytime soon. Very well. I'll entertain you, John Dare. Let's do it then, monk. My name is Quaranir. While being very gentlemanly and respectful this whole time against the wild character that is John, Quaranir decided to give John a piece of his mind. Overflow. He closed his eyes and spoke, and the power within him started to rumble. I have magicka. John noticed a spell which he wasn't familiar with. Thus he decided to observe the situation he's up against now that the monk is serious. What he saw almost took him by surprise. No matter how it looked, Quaranir was no longer breathing air like a normal mortal, but he was actually breathing magicka. This felt like a mix between the Altmare racial power, known as Highborn, that helps them take the magicka directly from the surroundings and immediately utilize it into magic with no magicka cost. Still, John has a counterpart. Allmaker, Azra. Calling two blessings at once, John summoned the root of power and the dawn beauty, making the magicka ripple around him. Quaranir opened his eyes as they started emitting the powerful golden light of magicka. John also opened his eyes, and his eyes were filled with blue light. Two different aptitudes of mysticism were about to clash. Quaranir immediately floated in the air, and his arms moved him, creating many afterimages, each of them casting a spell. John didn't fall short, as he immediately projected an unimaginable number of magic circles, all entangled together like a paradox. Many spells flew towards John from all different directions as John's paradox of spells started dealing with them one by one in a systematic succession. John's spell was even evolving itself by analyzing the opponent's magic before taking precautions. Such a thing, Quaranir was impressed by the monstrous spell he just saw. You're crazy good yourself, John said. I hope that's not the last of your tricks, monk. Hardly. Perfect. Both men shifted from their locations and appeared a fair distance ahead after exchanging a few melee attacks in which Quaranir realized it would be hopeless to fight John like that. He retreated with strange footwork, leaving more steps on the ground than 2 feet can ever make, and stood away with his hands clasped together. The spell he cast afterward created many images of himself on all the locations he stood on in the past few moments. As that happened, each of the images started casting a ridiculous amount of spells. This space is safe, right? John asked. Yes, Quaranir's copies replied. Then they all started to feel worried. Fine. John seemed like he was completely taking it easy, but the appearance of pride right next to him was giving off the vibes that he is casting something terrible. The thing about Coronir's spells is that most of them were temporal magic, meaning that all his copies were actually temporal clones. Once they felt what spell John was casting, they all showed signs of panic. What is that? I don't feel good. Defend ourselves? The temporal clones tried to react, but John was already releasing a very terrible spell. A spiral of energy started to dance in the so-called mirror dimension, ripping the very essence of space and time apart. It looked like a storm, but it was something that shouldn't exist in the imagination of a sane person. A temporal storm. The last time such a thing was witnessed by anyone was by John and the young Nurina during their journey in the Chaos Realm, 2 years or 200 years ago. Creating such a thing could only be achieved with the Elder Staff of Power and Fate, the staff that can turn John's imagination into reality. The temporal clones of Coronir were all obliterated without offering a shred of resistance to the mighty power of the temporal storm. The elderly elven mage himself was in so much awe that he could no longer stay in one place and needed to stop this spell before it goes out of control. From his sleeves, he sent out countless scrolls which carried runes of unknown origin that made even John question what he was seeing. Is that binary enchantment? He asked. No, it is way too similar. His signature secret technique of enchanting objects was strangely similar to these runes that even carried hints of both Inuic and Patamaic energies. John raised his staff, not willing to let this opportunity go, as he let his mental perception seep through the inner workings of those runes, which he comprehended just rather quickly. Why are you trying to dispel it? John asked Coronir. This level of runic harmony can't stabilize the temporal flow of the storm. You madman! Coronir shouted. This has escalated way too much. How could you create something you can't control? It must be contained. John realized that Coronir was misunderstanding something, and with his power, he stopped the temporal storm immediately. Actually, he stopped it so perfectly that it was in time in front of him. A temporal storm has no form or appearance since it occurs on the fourth dimension of existence, known as time. The only way to describe it is by imagining the space being cracked and broken like a piece of glass or a mirror. Then those cracks keep going in a spiral of destruction, leaving in their wake a level of destruction that nothing can repair. The way John stopped this temporal storm was so effortless that even Coronir, who was floating midair, lost focus on his spell and fell from the sky, barely able to stop himself from landing awkwardly. John looked at him with a natural face while holding pride over his shoulder. How did you do such a thing? Coronir asked in awe as he fixed his stance. Let's finish this duel, and I'll tell you. Finish this duel? No, I'll have to postpone it. The elf said. How? Just how the right master mentioned nothing about you. What in oblivion are you talking about? John couldn't help but feel uncomfortable towards Coronir's strange behavior, who was almost lost in thoughts, and checking John and the frozen temporal storm up and down. You are an unforeseen, anomalous entity. Coronir called John something which sounded very rude. Excuse me? Just don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. Coronir immediately disappeared from his place and left John making a dumb face. Who is Coronir? He is one of the game's NPCs. He is the Altmare Sigic monk who visits the College of Winterhold during the quest line of the College of Winterhold. John was waiting patiently for the Sigic monks to arrive in order to test them and finally analyze the mystery which most people of the Elder Scrolls fans were unable to crack, but as soon as he was about to see what an actual Sigic monk is made of, the old fellow bolted out and went off somewhere. It was then when John realized that he may have become a little bit overpowered. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr.ee/Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter. 609. Chapter 601, The Sigic Monk. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr.ee/Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter. 611. Today was an unfriendly day to Alina. She woke up earlier than anyone with messy hair and a drowsy head, submerged herself in warm water, ate breakfast on her own at the same time when John walked out of bed, kissed him goodbye, and headed out to the college. It is this day of the week again when she has to attend the college and teach a class. Despite the fact that she has striking popularity as the youngest college teacher and one of the most advanced tutors in both theory and practice, her class was only made of a handful of students. Compare that to her arch-nemesis, the teacher who only has to attend once a month and turns the entire college upside down when he shows up for class, her husband John. She explains complex theories, solves unimaginable equations, delves into arcane mysteries, and broadens the horizon of everyone in her class with her experience. On the other hand, John starts his class by cracking a few jokes, telling a story about how awesome he is, puts on a magic show, tells everyone to spread love and peace as he walks out amidst their fanatical cheers. Args! She banged her head against the table she was sitting at along with Faralda, Lonith, and Neria. "Your husband again?" Neria asked. "I hate this." Alina felt out of energy, as she didn't even want to complain anymore. Her teaching career is just impossible with someone like John acting like everyone's favorite rock star. "It told you before, didn't I? Not everyone enjoys being crammed up with arcane knowledge as if their heads can absorb it all. Not everyone is as smart as you are," Faralda said. And let's not forget that John is teaching the journeyman class. His teachings are all about practical real-life experience, and he is not the academic type such as you are. Lonith added, "We are in an academy. Why is it wrong to be the academic type?" Alina slapped the table. "I don't tell anyone this, but I prepare for my classes so much that I sometimes get frustrated about." As Alina wanted to rant, Neria interrupted. "For oblivion's sake, Alina, you keep ranting about teaching a class once a week and losing to your husband who teaches once a month in front of us, working-class ladies who have to teach every day." She said, "Grow some shame, woman." "What? You know my classes are different from the normal classes, right? Even the students can't take what I teach every day." "Tell her," Faralda, Lonith. Alina retorted. Faralda and Lonith looked at each other, then back at her with eyes that wanted to tell her that they are not on her side. "Guys," Alina made a sad face as she realized, "that's so low from you. What is low is how you and your husband behave." Nereus said, "You two always act almighty and important, as if the Sigic Order itself will one day come and seek an audience with you." At that time, a figure approached the table casting his tall shadow on the four ladies. "Excuse me," the man spoke as the three of the four women made sour faces when they saw him. "I need you to come with me at once." The man was the Thalmor advisor of the Archmage, the Altmare known as Enchanting, and his words were directed towards Alina. "What is it you want, Thalmor?" She replied with obvious hostility. "What is it I want?" Enchanting repeated Alina's words with obvious spite. "I want many things, teacher Alina, but now I need an explanation to what in Oblivion is going on." Alina and the other ladies frowned. "Did my husband put skeever shit in your son wine this time?" She asked with a grin she found impossible to conceal. Encanto's face turned from Altmare golden to ashen yellow as he remembered an event that almost ate him from inside. On the other hand, Lonith found it impossible to stop her burst of laughter, which proved contagious to the other two ladies. "Fine, allow me to clarify the situation. I'd like to know why there's someone claiming to be from the Sigic Order here in the college. More importantly, I'd like to know why he's asking for you specifically." Enchanting spoke, holding together the last bit of sense he had. The four ladies froze at once. Then three of them looked at Neria rather than looking at Alina. "Girl, even I can't see that one coming." Alina said, "Enough with this at once." It was finally Encanto's breaking point. Alina, Faralda, and Lonith turned towards him in rage, but the Thalmor wasn't backing down either. He looked at Alina and continued to speak. "You and I are going to have a little chat with that monk and find out exactly why he is here, and then he will be removed from college grounds." He was angry, nervous, and didn't seem like minding his manners with John's wife. After that time, John humiliated him in the main hall. But a Sigic monk really appeared, and they requested an audience with Alina of all people. She had an idea why, but she wasn't going to share it with Encano, of course. "Run along, Thalmer. I'm heading over there myself," she said dismissively. "I insist we go now." Encano started to act stubbornly. The nerve! Lana seemed infuriated by his behavior, yet Faralda held her arm, telling her not to act rashly. "Why are you so concerned?" Alina asked. Encano didn't feel like answering either, but he had to make himself clear. "I'll be the one asking the questions. All you need to know is that the Sijic Order is a rogue organization, believing themselves to be above the law. They have clashed with the Almarai Dominion before, and I have no intention of allowing that to happen here." His speech was remarkable and all, but Alina was now standing up. She is normally as tall as an Altmare, but when she stood just now, everyone in her surroundings could feel that they were dwarfed by her almost instantly. Their hearts raced, they started sweating coldly, and the very concept of time around them started to feel twisted. Her eyes started changing into slit pupils, and the air around her started to become suffocating. She stepped ahead. "Don't." She walked to the side. Then walked past Encano, and before circling around him, and directing her rage through him, making him shiver, and feel the taste of blood in his mouth. He immediately put his arm on the table and held his mouth with the other hand as his body temperature dropped to a critical point. One more second, and he would have been lying on the ground, vomiting blood all over the place. The poisonous lady, known as Alina, can do that much. If the people who felt the murderous intent she can project through her eyes can freeze like mice in the presence of a serpent, those who are directly targeted by her stare suffer even more. Encano barely stabilized his insides as he felt every organ of his body just twisting, then opened his mouth to speak, yet blood appeared all over his lips and teeth. "I'll be going to meet the visitor now." There was no need to tell John how Encano spoke to Alina. Actually, if John found out what happened, he would be pitying Encano for his blunder. Alina walked off the canteen and headed to where she expected the monk would be, the Archmage's quarters. Of course, Encano was following behind her with a face so wrathful as if he swallowed a stinking fish. Up to the second field in the Archmage's tower stood 3 men once Alina walked in, followed by Encano. "What's he doing here?" Encano said as he saw John standing in the Archmage's quarter as well. "This is administrative business. Ordinary teachers such as yourself are. I'll ask you nicely to shut up and won't ask again," John said. Encano saw John and couldn't contain his anger any longer. This is a serious offense towards the good intentions for the Almarai Dominion. Encano turned towards Archmage Savozarin and wanted to yap. "You can take those good intentions and stick them up your..." John was about to reply, but Savozarin stopped him. "Teacher John, that's enough." The Archmage spoke. "All right." John backed off with a grin. "Yes, that's enough." Encano wanted to take the momentum of Savozarin against John. While the yapping was happening between John and Encano, Alina noticed that everything started to quieten down, and even the air became subtle. She looked around and saw everyone around her simply frozen, with the space around her turning hazy. "What is this? What happened?" She turned around. "I advise you not to move around that much." Yet a voice replied to her, and she noticed it was the old elf in a monk's robe. "What? Who are you, and what are you doing?" Alina immediately turned hostile. "Easy. I simply came to talk," Coronir said. "And what did you do to them?" She pointed at the rest. "Your husband can explain the situation if just stops fooling around," Coronir said, pointing at John. Alina frowned and looked at John, who moved his eyes in his frozen stance. "TSK, you got me?" John moved himself, looking at Alina and Coronir. "I just wanted to see if I can fool you." Almost worked. "John, what does that man want?" Alina asked. "He said he wants to speak to you about the Eye of Magnus. You should hear him out," John said, assuring Alina, who has a tendency to lash out when she feels threatened. "I see. Monk, speak your piece," she said. "All right. We don't have much time, so we must be brief. The situation here at your college is of dire importance, and attempts to contact you as we have previously have failed. I believe it is due to the very source of our concern. This object, the Eye of Magnus, as your people have taken to calling it. The energy coming from it has prevented us from reaching you with the visions you have already seen. The longer it remains here, the more dangerous the situation becomes. And so I have come here personally to tell you it must be dealt with. Coroner said all he can. So that eye is dangerous? Alina asked. We don't know. But if we don't know, then it is most certainly very dangerous. Coroner replied. Can't you do anything about it? Alina asked. Due to our lack of knowledge at the current moment, we can't act rashly. Coroner replied. And why am I the one who has to deal with all that? Alina asked. Because you set the chain of events in motion in the crypt of Sarthal. Coroner gave another vague answer. John, I don't get what this man is saying. Alina lost hope in understanding Coroner and spoke to John. He is speaking about setting off a chain reaction of some sort of fate. Not necessarily your fate, but in order to let it stabilize, you must correct the course of events. What the monk was trying to say is that his order tracks things from the sidelines and is always divining for a future they can anticipate. The Eye of Magnus is most likely upsetting that ability of them to see in the future clearly. John said. Coroner seemed burdened by John's explanation, but in the end, he put on a smile. I can't confirm or deny any of that. He said. That's what John says when I accuse him of being with the other girls behind my back. Alina said with a tired face. What you need to know is that object, the eye, it is immensely powerful. This world is not ready for it. If it remains here, it will be misused. Many in the Order believe it has already been misused or that something will happen soon, something that cannot be avoided. Coroner diverted John and Alina from their dangerous conversation. Can't we contain it? Alina asked. I tested a few things the other day, and it is uncontainable so far. There is a Dwemer lockbox nearby, but I'm still working on how to open rather than sealing something inside of it. John said, so this guy just shows up and tells us it is dangerous and mysterious? Then, what can we actually do? Alina seemed rather impatient with all that mystery going around. Only the one who sets off any fate has the ability to alter its course even by a little bit. This is where you come in, Lady Alina. We believe that your effort should be directed towards dealing with the aftermath, but we cannot predict what that will be. Coroner explained, unfortunately, the future is as obscured to us as it is to you. The overwhelming power of the eye makes it difficult for us to see. Did you hear that just now? Alina narrowed her eyes. Yes, most curious. John nodded, mimicking her expression. He is speaking of the future, as if they are supposed to be knowing what it is. So the Psijic Order doesn't only rely on divination magic as a tool of its arsenal, but it uses it as its main method to maybe watch over everything. Alina clapped her hand. Ah! John nodded, pointing towards her while acting as if he caught on to her point. Of course, you already know that, right? Alina asked him. Yeah. John nodded and looked away. As the duo looked at Coroner, who was barely hiding behind an awkward smile, he immediately decided to end it here. I fear I have already overstepped the bounds of my order, but I will offer this. Coroner cleared his voice and looked at Alina meaningfully. Seek out the Augur of Dun Lane in your college. His perception may be more coherent than ours. The Augur. Alina raised her brows. I know of him. John introduced him some time ago. Barely anyone in the college believed in the Augur's existence, let alone an outsider. Then again, an outsider from the Psijic Order, which is famous for its divination, and the Augur of Dun Lane, who is a very accurate diviner, are surely on good terms. This conversation has required a great deal of effort on my part, so I am afraid I must leave you. We will continue to... Coroner paused for a while before exchanging eye contact with John and smiling. We will continue to watch over the situation here. Coroner finally ended the spell, which isolated time, and everything slowly returned back to normal. Strange as it may seem, John perfectly remembered what he was saying to Ancano, and the two continued locking horns as if nothing happened just now. Savozarin seemed to have grown tired of John, and Encano then directed his attention towards the Sijic monk. "I'm sorry. Were you about to say something?" Savos asked. "Actually, I would like to take my leave," Coronir apologetically said. "What is the meaning of this?" Encano completely disengaged with John and jumped in Coronir's way. "I'm sorry. I'm afraid I don't understand. Don't play coy. You asked to see a specific member of the college. Here she is. Now what is it that you want?" "There's been a misunderstanding. Clearly, I should not be here. I shall simply take my leave." "What? What trickery is this? You're not going anywhere until I find out what you're up to." Encano could take this no more and stomp in rage. "I'm not up to anything. I apologize if I have offended you in any way." Coronir showed respect towards the present in the room and walked away. "I'll see you off then." John immediately tagged along with Coronir. Encano was at a loss at what to do since he was being ignored by all parties. "So this is it then? John Dare and his people are colluding with the Sijic Order? A criminal organization," he shouted. Coronir stopped immediately and looked towards John. "That won't cause you any trouble?" he asked. "Not even a tiny bit," John replied, offering Coronir to go on ahead before sparing Encano a cold stare. John was just making sure what to record in his naughty account book to calculate the interest which he shall make those naughty people pay. But right now, he's going to have an official talk with the Sijic monks. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr/e/Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter 611. Chapter 602, The Sijic Research. Also consider commenting and joining Discord all on this URL. https://linktr/e/Donovel. Patter 0 in latest chapter 611. "So let's initiate our talks, Arch-Wizard John Dare," Coronir said as he laid down a few scrolls on the table. "We're eating breakfast first," John said as he waved for the waiter of the tavern. "Thane John, such a happy occasion to see you." Dager, owner of the Frozen Hearth Tavern, came to John showing respect. "Thanks, Dager. Me and my guest here will take 2 of the usual breakfast," John said. "The usuals?" Coronir asked suspiciously. "Oh, Thane John's breakfast. That's something on the menu. 2 boiled chicken eggs, 2 loaves of fresh rye bread, a small plate of herbal cheese, 2 slices of smoked salmon for him and Miss Nefertiti, a warmed bottle of milk, and the seasonings separated." Dager recited the most famous breakfast on the menu. "That's rich," Coronir commented. "The secret for long youth and good skin is always a rich breakfast," John replied. "I'll take it then." From what it seemed, everything in Winterhold revolves around one man, and there is an astonishing amount of loyalty coming from all the people around him. This is not something made by ruling people as a tyrant or even by ruling at all. Everyone in this establishment, and along the way from the college to the tavern, were looking at John with eyes of comradeship and trust. He is not their ruler. He is their leader, their friend, and their hero. Until the breakfast was laid out on a table and a black cat appeared out of nowhere to share John's meal, Coronir kept observing everything slowly. "So, you weren't supposed to walk into the college?" John asked. Coronir paid attention to John. "Your superiors, they didn't tell you to walk in there," John clarified. "No. As a senior monk, I have some freedom at handling business," Coronir replied. "Truly?" John put on a light tablet beside him and tabbed on it a few times, which caused Coronir to narrow his eyes and take out another scroll from his bag. "Your wife, she is very intelligent. Terrifyingly so," Coronir said. "She is twice as smart as I am. She is also a very good diviner," John said. "You realize that you are speaking to a Sijic monk?" Coronir smiled. "Indeed. She is better than you guys. Her future vision may be short, but even being around the eye of Magnus didn't affect her ability that much," John said. "What affects our divination ability is the fact that we take in mind countless variables," Coronir said. So you people run future simulations rather than plain old divination. John said, I will neither confirm nor deny. Save it. Sothasil was once a member of your order. He used your method to create a mechanical city. I already know that you rely on natural knowledge in your divination to eliminate the falsehood from the truth. John said. Coronir opened a part of the scroll he had first and added a few runes on it with his magic. This will be fun. John smiled. Two opponents taking notes on one another. Whoever knows more wins. I can tell that the Sijic order has good intentions. John said. Great, but right now they are as clueless as we are. You guys rely on divination more than you should and stay out of the worldly affairs. Once there is something that catches your attention, you walk up and interfere as little as you possibly can. John said, what we do is to calculate the best fate possible. Our interference is usually unneeded unless to tilt the chances a little bit. Coronir replied in a vague tone. Such a small role for such a big organization. John smiled. I'll ask a question. What do you define fate as? Coronir smiled. The most probable future outcome. He replied. So the more you know, the better results you can divine. John said. Indeed. Some subjects, however, are impossible to divine. Coronir, the Eye of Magnus is one thing, and I just discovered a few more things. John smiled. It seems that you are aware of it as well. Coronir understood more about John. My wife always says it is impossible to divine my actions. John said, many anomalous entities, whether they are people or objects, tend to have that awful trait from time to time. Coronir said, that's why I prefer detection magic over divination. Its feedback is always accurate. John said as he fed a piece of salmon to Nefertiti. It is indeed much easier, but there is a luxurious feeling for predicting the future and altering it for the best outcome. A successful businessman such as yourself must think so as well, right? Coronir asked. On the contrary, I am a firm believer of no risk, no lesson, no pain, no gain. John said, I see. Very curious indeed. Coronir said, and added a few runes to his scroll. John also tabbed on his tablet a few times. So, why is the Sijic Order interested in profiling me? John asked. No, we have already profiled you once. This time we were just fixing some fatal mistakes in the first profile. Coronir said. Oh. John felt flattered. When was I first profiled? Yeah. I am liberty to divulge information about the Order's methodology, so... Coronir wanted to back out, but John didn't let him do so. Hey, it's my profile, but it's okay anyway. I understand. I was just going to provide you with accurate information if you asked. John said, provide me? Coronir narrowed his eyes. For free? I'm not a man of many secrets. John said. Coronir thought this is too good to be true, and John made it look like a challenge that he isn't actually hiding anything if he was asked directly. All right, Coronir said, and partially opened the scroll and read the first few lines. Subject's official name, John Dare birth name, John Hild Firemane. Former profile title, The Prophecy Child of Iliac Bay. Wow! John raised his brows. I was profiled before I was born. To be honest, it was demoted to a rumor afterwards since you disappeared for 16 years. The next time you surfaced was in the profile of the High Priestess of Sidis, but we failed to make the connection. Coronir said, you guys are excellent profilers nonetheless. John smiled. What else? Subject type, anomalous human. Race, snort. Gender, male? Did you just assume my gender? John asked with a sharp gaze. Coronir fell silent for a while. Is there anything you want to clarify? He then asked, readying himself to edit the section. Nah, I just feel offended because I should have filled that one myself. I can imagine other people getting really upset about it. It is impossible to be able to assume other people's genders with almost 72 genders out there. John said, we've encountered that case once. Coronir said, I remember reading a profile about that. It was very in-depth. So we keep it to male? Male cat person. Coronir looked at John and added a few runes on the scroll, but away from the gender line. All right, What's next? Ah, yes. Subject classification, unforeseen. That bad? It is. I just raised it personally to unforeseen this morning. Wow. What else? Subject notes. Updated today, subject is one of the most curious anomalies both in person and in detail. The subject is also in possession of many anomalous entities and objects that are mostly rated between minor and safe. Minor and safe? John frowned. I guess accuracy isn't your strong suit then. Coroner didn't want to bother explaining more about the inner workings of the Psijic Order to John, but it seems that the latter was putting more value on himself. John's aim was simple. He just wants to better understand the Psijic Order, which is something he researched a lot in both his past and current lives. On the other hand, Coroner had one goal, and it is to discern who John Dare is and how to prevent any unforeseen disasters. Minor and safe are just risk qualifications. When the Order tries to rate the risks of causing a future disaster, we either call it safe for subjects of no particular threat, minor for subjects that can cause national-scale disturbances, such as most of the Daedric artifacts. Major goes for subjects with the potential to start massive changes and need to be contained at all costs. Safe, minor, and major. But I was rated as, what was the word again? John asked. Unforeseen, Coroner said. This rating was carried by many subjects of great power, which are also obscure when someone tries to divine them. The Eye of Magnus is one. You too are considered unforeseen as from this day. Does that have any relationship with the unforeseen queen? John asked. His question was related to Mirren and Miranda, as they are descendants of the unforeseen Queen Erin, founder of the first Almaride Dominion. Yes, it is a title that was given to Queen Erin by the scribes of Artium. Coroner confirmed. Strange. John scratched his chin. One thing I don't understand is how my actions can't be read through divination and my birth was foretold. If I remember correctly, the same case also happened with Queen Erin. Indeed, Coroner replied. Birth is the easiest thing to predict since before the emergence of a great fate, many signs start to show themselves. I see your point. John didn't agree or disagree since he was not knowledgeable in these regards. To sum up the rest of the report, you have come to our attention during your time in the Alikar Desert at the Citadel of Ebonarm. After investigating you, we discovered that you were on Azura's Daedric labors. You were classified as safe until the fight with the Worm God when you displayed power beyond our first estimation, which made you into a minor-ranked entity. I still don't like getting belittled. Please, these are not derogatory ranks. Every entity we take interest into is beyond that of should exist and affects the daily life of the common folk. Whatever. Either way, we noticed that during that time, you have taken a step out of the veil of reality and traversed the realms beyond the skin on Cities. I applaud your return, which wasn't witnessed for hundreds of years. You even know about that? We also know that you and Lord Shiagarath call each other nephew and uncle. Oh, now that you mention it, I think he's getting lonely these days. Last but not least are the appearance of the Dragonborn and the Crisis rank dragons. Crisis rank now. John added a 5th rank as he was counting on his fingers. It is a rank where we have no power over. It is not unforeseen, but no, the Psijic Order has no power to handle it except by offering what little guidance we have. We prefer to let the world handle these matters through its own plans, which are mostly unforeseeable. That's lazy of you. We are nothing but an order of scholars, Sir John. We have limits. Coroner said, the scale of a crisis-ranked anomaly can threaten the entire existence of Mundus. The Oblivion Crisis, the Warp in the West, the Soul Burst, the revival of Dagoth UR, and now the return of the World Eater. But you don't show yourselves in these situations. That's because we have no power over it. We only record and keep profiles on all these subjects as we always did before the recording of history. John sighed as Coroner kept selling the story of how the Psijic Order is a neutral party that only interferes whenever it feels it is able to and keeps recording and profiling. For the powerful order of mysticism masters which house names like Venus Galerian, Manamarco, Sothasil, and Divath Fyr, This passive attitude made it feel a little bit underwhelming. John said the word which came across his mind. I apologize if we don't live up to the fantasies of the outsiders, but that's the thing about deciphering the mysteries. It feels underwhelming. Coroner explained. Meh. John rested his head on his palm as he leaned with his arm on the table. When you are the Dragonborn, I am sure your life is way beyond exciting compared to us common folk. Coroner said. Nah, it's been just dull as of late. John replied, but he then narrowed his eyes and looked at Coroner, who just called him Dragonborn. What a marvelous existence you are. Coroner started to fervently add more lines of runes on his scrolls. To be honest, we never knew who the Dragonborn would be, but to think he is the child of the prophecy from 20 years ago. It is all coming together rather nicely. Many in the Order are avid fans of the Dragonborn and the dragons in general, thus we had an extensive research a few months ago. We knew the Dragonborn would be an unforeseen ranked entity, but to be honest, running into you wasn't how I imagined it would be. The whole situation turned from John being mage fanboying over the Sigic Order to the Sigic monks being fanboys of the Dragonborn. As John said, it is underwhelming indeed. Whatever. John sighed. Let's go, I'll show you some of those so-called minor anomalies, or whatever. Oh, how considerate. Coroner gathered his scrolls hastily and got ready to leave. Just a word of warning. John said, you might want to have more scrolls than the ones you have. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.